Well, good afternoon if you are in New York City or in Florida or anywhere in the Americas. Good evening if you are in the United Kingdom, Europe, Africa. Good later in the evening in points further east, and special love to our loved ones in Ukraine. We are with you. We think of you. And good evening to people all around the world who are watching the June 3rd, 2022 edition of Fred Plotkin on Fridays. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays, by the way, on Idagio, the place where classical music happens. Idagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all around the world. This is June, and my goal for this June is to have people on who I have been very inspired by. In some cases this month, they're not people I've ever really met or worked with. That's the case with today's guest. In other cases, there are people I've known and worked with very closely, but all of them have in common that I've noticed the work, I've been inspired by their work and what they do, by their versatility, by their ingenuity, by their talent, and by their always seeming to be in the right place at the right time. And one of them is today's guest, bass Matthew Rose from the United Kingdom. Do you say United Kingdom, Great Britain, England? What do you say?
You can say what you want. I'm not so very proud of my country anymore, Fred. So
Right.
Take your pick.
We can get into that a bit. I'm told the Queen is not watching today because she's otherwise engaged with the festivities of her Jubilee. But I think she's at home resting. I think she had too much yesterday. Yeah. Well, we wish her well too. But I do want to talk to you about the part of the United Kingdom of England that you are from. A town called Seaford, Seaford. There is also one in Long Island in New York City, just outside of New York City, where I broke my leg years ago. So I know Seaford very well. And it's near Brighton. And so that's southern England, that's English Channel, France. East Sussex is another way of referring to it. And in reading up about it, I discovered that Clementine Churchill, the wife of Winston Churchill, lived there, that Margaret Rutherford, Miss Marple, from the Agatha Christie films, studied there. Many, many people were from there. It's also on the rail line to, am I pronouncing it correctly, Lewes or Lewis?
Lewis, yeah.
Lewis, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But talk about Seaford, what kind of environment it was growing up.
Well, actually, it's quite interesting. Annette Bening has just made a film about Seaford, and it's all set in Seaford. So if anyone's desperate to know what it's like in Seaford in East Sussex, I can't remember, Hope Gap, I think it's called, the film. That's exactly.
I know Annette Bening.
Yeah, so that film. So that's
I will ask her.
For some reason, they made a film in Seaford. So there we go. If anyone's desperate to see it, and Seaford, the town itself isn't so wonderful. Obviously, it's by the sea, hence the name. But if you go up, there's a hill, Seaford Head, and you go up and over, you come to Cookmere Haven and the Seven Sisters, which are the very famous chalk cliffs that everyone takes pictures of. So it's an incredibly beautiful countryside, not a very nice town. Felicity Lott also lives there, which is very nice.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, and Richard Angus, who is the chief conductor in David Angus in Boston. He lives in Seaford. There's a few Seaford people from Seaford because it's not quite Lewis, but it's near Lewis and near Glyndebourne and everything, and an easy trip into London. So I was very lucky to grow up there. I mean, the countryside is incredibly beautiful, and it was much less busy in those days. I mean, musically minded, I had an amazing music teacher at school who sadly died in November. A lady called Margaret Darwolf Smith was her name, and she was my music teacher from the age of 4 till about 12 or 13. And she was actually, and up to her death, she was a very, very dear friend of mine. Also with Felicity Lotts, and you know, from the age of whatever 2, 3, 4, I guess 4 or 5, she instilled in me, and also there was a man doing doing the choir at school called Kevin White. So not just to love music, but also the fact that music could be done seriously and well, and that actually doing that is a great thing to do. So, and actually you get even more enjoyment out of music when you take it seriously and you do it well. So I was incredibly fortunate to have her. She was my piano teacher too, and I learned to play the cello there. Then rather confusingly, I went to a boarding school called Seaford College, which is 60 miles away. It had moved because they were worried that the Germans might attack in the Second World War. So they moved to a very, very beautiful spot under the South Downs in West Sussex near Chichester, actually. So I went to school there, and we had a school choir, and we had lots of good stuff going on. More importantly for me, there was a golf course at the school. So
I want to get to golf in a bit. I know you are in Florida, by the way. I wore this flamingo shirt for you, by the way.
Oh, really? Is that for me? Thank you.
That's because you are in Florida golfing. There is a whole community of, I call them singers who are swingers, who play golf and meet up, and we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
But a couple of things about Seaford, because it sounds very appealing to me when I've read about it in preparation for a conversation. One is it has the longest serving town crier of any town in England. His name is Peter White. He's been there since 1977, so longer than you've been alive.
And actually his wife used to conduct, or Pat White used to conduct, there was a Seaford Young Musicians Orchestra that I was part of, and his wife conducted that. So I know Peter. There we go. I know Peter.
So this is my question. I've had the good fortune to see you in many performances, and the nature of bass roles is that sometimes they are the star, but often they are very prominent, memorable, featured players. And I was sitting through a very long performance of Die Meistersinger a few years ago at the Met with a wonderful cast: James Morris, Johann Botha, Annette Dash. And then the Night Watchman shows up, and that's a wonderful role. And it was you, and I had seen you in other things before and already checked your name as someone I wanted to always follow. But this one was kind of a knockout. So when I knew that you come from a town that has the longest serving town crier, was any of that invested in your performance as the Night Watchman?
I feel incredibly guilty now that it wasn't Fred, actually. So no, that was a scary thing to do, because obviously as the Night Watchman you don't rehearse very much. Everyone else rehearses this very long opera, and then you sort of just turn up and do your bit, and you come in from, it's a very, very deep stage and set, and you're up very high, and it was with Maestro Levaiman, he was still conducting, and he would just look like a very, very long way away. And it was my first time working with him, someone who I had revered and seen so many times performing. But it was, to be part of that, even in a very tiny way, to be part of that opera is just, it's one of my favorite operas. It really is just a great thing. And to say I've sung that role at the Met is actually something I'm incredibly proud of.
Well, as I recall, it's an Otto Schenk, Gunther Schneider, Zimson production. And for the most part, whatever one could say about their productions, I mostly like them. One thing that they almost always did was they built sets that focus sound. And so that when you were coming down that long steps and checking that everybody was in their beds and so forth, you have no problem filling an auditorium with sound, believe me. But I noticed the degree to which you seem to acknowledge the shape of the set and brought that to your performance. Is that something you did consciously, or you just came naturally?
No, that's just us being, we can only do what we can only deal with the situations we're given with. So if a set designer and a director, I don't want to say the word competent enough, but understanding enough that if a set is designed in a certain way, then sound is going to travel in a more easier fashion. So, it felt good to be singing that, even though I was a million miles away. Sometimes you stand on that stage, there's some productions, and it's even the Don Carlos we just did. It's kind of, even though the set, you think it was very helpful because of these walls, somehow the sound swirled in the middle of this there was a round set, and it kind of swirled around. It's amazing how that affects us. And if it's a very easy set to make sound on, especially in that what seemingly is an enormous auditorium. You know, visually, when you look out, you just see an enormous space. But you have to trust that the sound is going to travel in a very nice and wonderful way. And if a set is designed properly and helpfully, then that's all to our benefit. Yeah. So it's nothing. We just have to be grateful when these situations happen.
Yeah. So for listeners who are hearing about Don Carlos, and I say that with the S, who is the French version, Matthew recently appeared in an excellent cast in the Met's first ever French production of Don Carlos by Giuseppe Verdi, who wrote it first to a French libretto, and then it was translated into Italian. And it is on many days of the month my favorite opera of all. And it has many different versions. I've worked on numerous productions, and each one is slightly different, not in terms of the production design, but in terms of what music and text are used and how certain characters are played. And you had one of those roles. It's not the biggest role in the opera, but it is absolutely crucial, namely the monk. And now that the production has been done and has been documented on video, I feel we can talk about the monk without giving away secrets. Had you played the monk before in Italian?
I played it in French, actually.
Okay.
So when I was at the Young Artist Program at the Royal Opera House, and then the first job I did from leaving that was they did a Welsh National Opera. We did the 5-act French version, and I was lucky. That was my first job out as a fledgling self-employed singer. Mm-hmm. You know, and just being part of that opera. And actually in the last act I had to walk around in Elizabeth's aria as well. But you know, I became completely obsessed with that opera, you know, and I'd already knew it from the Papano recording in French. I think so the first sort of understanding of that opera for me was the French version, and when I heard that the Met were going to do a French version, I kind of very politely asked if I could possibly be the monk, please. Mm-hmm. Which somehow they went with. And you know, that was, again, this is one of the great experiences of my life, was doing that with this cast of people who were not just amazing and inspirational colleagues, but also incredibly dear friends. You know, Etienne, Matthew, Sonia, you know, just really great friends. And with Yannick conducting, obviously, it was, and with David directing, you know, it was really one of the great things I've ever done in my life. And I was very sad when that music wasn't flowing through my veins every night, you know. Just
so I'm going to say the names for people who don't know. Yannick Nézet-Séguin was the conductor and his music director of the Met. David McVicker was the, as we say in America, the producer. Elsewhere they say stage director, creator of the production. And Matthew Polenzani was a wonderful Don Carlos. It's an incredibly hard role, and people were, let's be blunt, doubting that he could do it. He was just spectacular. Sonia Yancheva was Elizabeth, well, always in French. Etienne Dupuis was Rodrigo in Italian. Jamie Barton was the Princess of Eboli. Eric Owens was King Philip II. John Relier, I'm doing this from memory, Matthew.
That's very good, Fred.
John Relier was the Grand Inquisitor, and you were the monk. Those are the principals.
I have similar skills there, don't I? I can rattle off casts as well. So
okay, all right. Who is this celestial voice?
I was also covering Philip, and I had one performance of Philip as well, which was just,
really?
Yeah. With I was walking to the theatre at 5:30 for a 6:30 show, and I had a text message saying you're on, and I was standing there with Jerry Finley at the time, and I was like, oh my god. So I had about half an hour being in total shock, and then I tried to I had a few Gatorades and got on with it. But yeah, lucky me to have done that.
Talk about last week. I, as you know, had the world famous Samuel Ramey as my guest, and I had a lot of tech troubles getting on. And the first question I asked Sam was about how one reacts when things are supposed to be running normally and suddenly everything is topsy-turvy. That must be a similar experience to you're coming in and planning to sing the monk, important role that he is, but suddenly you are cast in what many people think of as the central character of the opera, not the title character. So how did that night go?
Yeah, so and I've always had a rule in my life never to go and hit golf balls or anything on the day of a show. And that was the one day I did that in my life. So I'd been at Chelsea Piers in the morning with my friend Adam Plahetka. I'd also talked to some students in the afternoon for a couple of hours. Luckily, I'd gone home and had a nap, which is the crucial thing for any good opera performance, is a nap. And then I turned up at the theatre, and it is, it's not something I've done before. I've never even sung the aria before in front of people. You kind of think that Ella Jemima Mo is something that I would have done a lot, but it isn't actually. So, and the way the cover system works, when you're doing a new production, so these guys all had 5 weeks with David McVicker, really working out what everything meant, how to do it. We had very few cover rehearsals, so we did have some cover rehearsals. Even on the stage, there were some cover rehearsals, but we didn't have the very inspired and individualistic direction that one would hope to have doing a role like that for the first time on that stage. So I kind of had a way with it, having seen Ferruccio do it about 60 times and other people do it. As an opera, I sort of really know how I'd like to do it. But then if you just get one shot at doing it with, the costumes were incredibly intricate and hard to deal with. And you haven't worked, the rehearsal process, you work out how to pace yourself and how to do things and how not to overblow certain notes and phrases, blah blah blah. So not having done that, it's a complete blur to me now, actually, that night. Mm-hmm. Luckily there were 2 people with cameras in the auditorium, so I do have some very nice pictures, one of which I've just had printed, and I will keep. But for me, it's the greatest opera ever written. It's the most incredible piece. I was up there doing, to do the poser scene with Etienne, who's one of my very best friends in the world. Especially that scene, which I think is just miraculous. The Act 2 poser scene.
So describe that for listeners who don't know. Describe what that scene is.
So basically, Philip feels very lonely and vulnerable, and he needs a person to help him because no one else will. So he's trying to persuade Poser to help him, and Poser's trying to explain how desperate the situation is in Flanders, and unless the Flemish people are saved and looked after properly, then there's no hope for anyone. And Philip has to sadly say those people have to be treated like that, because unfortunately that's the way it goes sometimes. It's kind of, he ruled such an empire, it's untrue. Not as big as Charles is, obviously, as we know, although then he got the Americas. And it's just, just musically, it is just so, it's one of the great scenes of opera ever written. The thing about Don Carlos for me is that you go through these scenes, like the Act 2 scene, you think it's just, nothing can be better than this. And then you have Act 3 and you have the Auto da Fe and all that, and you think nothing can be better than this. And then you have Act 4, which is probably the greatest act of opera ever written, I think,
you and I agree on that, yeah.
Yeah, it's just the most remarkable thing that Verdi put together, and he was so inspired to do it, in slightly different versions. Maybe the ending of our Act 4, I didn't quite enjoy the very long exposed ending that we did, but and it's a piece that gives me such joy and hope. And I went to Escorial once, and I got very obsessed with the whole Philip thing. And actually, before I was studying singing, I was doing a history degree, so the whole historical element of these stories is such an important facet of how I prepare and think about what I'm doing.
What history did you study?
So I didn't do it for very long or for very seriously, but it was mostly 19th, 20th European history. So, which is incredibly helpful doing what I do now. There's a few, Robert Lloyd, Ian Bostridge, there's a few historians around.
I guess because knowing I wanted to work in opera was a history major as well. And I did Venetian and Renaissance and post-Renaissance history, because although opera was born in Florence, it really grew in Venice. And I felt that if I knew basically how opera grew and learned all the history of Italy and, Verdi's many issues, that I could grow from that, and learning the Roman Empire, even, Wagner with Rienzi, Berlioz with many things, it all goes back to Italy in one way or another. And I felt that should be my foundation. But then, of course, you learn Austrian and the Habsburgs and the Spanish and everything. And I really believe that every opera singer should have to be a history major. I do.
Well, the thing is, being an opera singer, you have to be, you have to be a music major, you have to be a singing major, you have to be a linguist, you have to be a dramatist. It's just all these different facets of our job. And the more fluent you are, the great singers who ever lived actually sang the languages that they spoke very well. There's not, Pavarotti sang in Italian, and he was amazing in Italian. And it's so important that you have complete understanding of all these different facets of what we have to do to make what is an incredibly hard thing slightly easier, at least, you know.
Mm-hmm. I was fortunate. I've been fortunate to work with many wonderful artists, but one that comes to mind who I revered was the French soprano Regine Crespin. And Regine Crespin in English was better than native English speakers, and in German was better than native German speakers. And she told me that her philosophy was, il faut vivre la langue. You must live the language. In other words, don't only learn it perfectly, but live it actively in your life. So that if you're doing a role in English and you happen to be born in France, you really have to be living in English for the period that you're doing that role in English. And she was never wrong. So in my experience, but I want to go back. We're going to go back to Seaford, but I first want to go back to the monk. The reason I ask about this, and I've studied the opera Don Carlos endlessly, and one can study it for a lifetime, is that his role is really the nexus of the opera, and whoever the stage director is needs to come to certain conclusions about who the monk is and what he represents. So my first question is, do you have a strong concept of who the monk is? And number two, have you had to change that working with different directors with different concepts?
So I don't know, obviously, again, because I'm mega into the history. So we came up with David, and I don't know whose idea, if it was me or him or whatever, that what had happened is that Charles V had gone to a monastery and was hiding and pretended to have died, and had relinquished his. So he gave the Holy Roman Empire bit basically to his brother Maximilian, and the Spanish, Dutch, American stuff Philip received, and Portugal. So Portugal and Naples, although he was already King of Naples, Philip. So we decided that what had happened is he'd relinquished his throne, and that he was hanging out in the monastery, and then that they all turn up because it was Valladolid was still the capital of Spain in those days. It was before Madrid had become the capital. So we consciously decided that it was actually the king there who had given up the throne. It wasn't a ghost or anything. So at the end, when he came in, he was representing himself. It wasn't a ghost or anything.
So therefore, it's kind of like Pope Benedict XVI, who retired rather than died.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Pope Francis I is poping, if that's a word, but with over his shoulder, sitting inside the Vatican, is Benedict, who, whatever his strengths, weaknesses are is not the point here, but kind of like a conscience looking over the shoulder. And King Philip
without knowing who he was, though,
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there are so many endings to the opera Don Carlo, where I know the Italian version, Dio mi vendicherà, God will vindicate me, and Elizabeth either faints, whatever she does, holding a very long note in the Italian version. And sometimes Carlos is killed in our view. Sometimes the monk appears and takes him away into the monastery. Do you have feelings about dramaturgically how you think that should work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sad that such a great opera has such a kind of ambiguous, weak ending. In a way, it's a shame that there wasn't. Verdi didn't find, and he obviously was looking for a solution, and he gave several solutions. So I think David Mavica basically served everything up. So he had me turning up, plus the ghost of Poser coming to embrace his dead friend, and you have to finish the opera some way, and it's in a way it's the least important part of the whole opera, isn't it? The whole is so much more important than the ending. Some operas it's all about the ending and how it finishes. This is about, you have act 1, 2, 3, 4 that is just pretty much as perfect as opera gets, and then and then a wonderful aria from Elizabeth, and then a quite good duet, and then a funny ending. So I think everyone's fine. I think everyone's had enough wonderfulness by that point to not be so worried by the ending potentially.
I agree.
Way to look at it?
There's yet another way to look at this. It's very prismatic that many people say the central character is Philip. I could argue that the central character is Elizabeth, because we meet her at the very beginning if we do the whole work and don't cut the first act, the Fontainebleau scene. And it's about her journey from being the queen of the French, who are frozen and impoverished, and the Spanish are flourishing, to thinking she's marrying Carlos, but then being told she has to marry the King Philip to unite France and Spain. And she's accused of adultery. She's accused of all kinds of terrible things, so that she actually gets the last big aria in the opera rather than all the other characters. Carlos doesn't really have much of an aria. And I always see this opera as the summation of her journey. When she thinks about France, she thinks about everything she did and how she sacrificed the man she loved, in effect, sacrificed being with the man she loved for the good of her nation, which is a very Verdian concept. And then right after she sings this glorious aria, that's where it all unfolds, and Carlo is being pursued by the Grand Inquisitor, by his father, into the monastery, and then on some occasions he's killed, on other occasions the monk appears. But Verdi sums it up musically in about 30 seconds after 5 hours. And so I don't fault him for that, no matter how it's staged, because musically it's just so stunning at the very end that he's forgiven. Not that he needs my forgiveness, but it's really, I agree with you. It's an opera that I could live with and study my whole life.
And yeah, I'll never forget when I was at the Royal Opera House and the Auto de Fe music would start, I would just run as fast as I could to that auditorium. I mean, that is just the most addictive. That scene for me is maybe the last scene of Meistersinger, the last few scenes of Meistersinger, but for me that is as great as opera gets. And it's and that's the thing, and you hear it and you think this is amazing, and then it gets even better. Then you have Act 4. It's a miracle. I'm glad that it's done as often as it is, actually, even though it must be unbelievably expensive. I mean, the Royal Opera House do it very often, Don Carlo, and it's the epitome of what we do. For all of us that take opera seriously, it's the opera we should take the most serious, maybe.
For listeners who don't know the Auto da Fe scene, it's in effect the burning of heretics, but it's also the acting out of the power grabs among all the different characters. Verdi did yet another moment of genius by having the Flemish nobles who come and plead to Philip. There's 6 baritones, and Verdi wrote music for 6 baritones that is just glorious.
Having lived, I lived in Flanders for a while. Everyone is a baritone in Flanders, so that makes complete sense.
Is it the cheese?
No, it's the beer. It's all the beer.
Beer, okay. Yeah. So they're baritones.
Very good, Fred.
Thank you. But the Auto da Fe scene also has offstage choruses. It has a lot of spectacle on the stage with the burning of the heretics. Sometimes producers, stage directors get a bit out of hand and do too much, and it's very graphic and gory. But it is one of the largest, loudest, most complicated things for a conductor to conduct. There are offstage conductors, there are chorus masters, there are almost all the characters from the opera on the stage in one way or another. And because it's so varied from very soft to incredibly loud, I always, when we had CDs and I had to buy new audio equipment, I would take my Claudio Abbado version to the audio shop and play the Auto da Fe to check the speakers and the sound system, and would
French
buy
version or the Italian version.
Yeah, because I worked on that production in Milan.
The French one. The French one.
No, the Italian.
Okay.
Yeah. He did both, and both are great. But I use the Italian because that's the version I knew, because it was the production I knew. But so there are roles I want to talk to you about, but I do, in a way, want to get back to something you mentioned about Seaford. The fact that you had a music teacher from the age of 4, and that was that in what Americans call public schools, the British, are they state schools? I don't know the term in England for school for all kids.
Yeah, no, it was. I was very privileged and went to a private school, and actually it was the last school left in Seaford. There was a time that Seaford, for some reason, was the world capital of sending your children away to school. And I think there at some point there were like 60. It's a very small town, and there were 65 schools or something in Seaford, because apparently the air was very good, and people would send their children down from London. So when you go to Seaford, Fred, you'll notice the train platform is incredibly long for such a small little station. So. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
About the fact that you had access to a music teacher at the age of 4.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So all through the school there. So she was my music teacher, and we had a school choir that the choir master took it very seriously, and we did it very seriously. And then because that was one of the reasons that I went to my next school, which was called Seaford College, which again had a very reputable choir. Although, I mean, I wasn't really, music wasn't my focus. It was just something I did on top of everything else. I was a swimmer, and I played golf, and I played cricket, an awful lot of cricket. That was my thing, actually. And it wasn't until my last 2 years, so it was about the age of 17, that a new teacher came to the school, and his name was Martin Essex, and he was a double bass player. And somehow we clicked, and literally he gave me the keys to the music room, and that changed my life. And every evening I would go down, and these pieces that I'd never heard before, the Creation, Beethoven symphonies, Verdi requiems, things like this. It was a time for me to really, this music all came to my life all at once. And he was also very enthusiastic. My last year, probably because of my enthusiasm, actually, we did Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat as a musical, and I was the narrator, so that's a big bit. We did the Messiah in Chichester Cathedral on my 18th birthday, which was pretty cool. And we even did Foyer Requiem in another cathedral nearby. It was just, it was basically, wow, this music thing's actually quite cool. Whereas before it was just something I did, and I didn't really think about it. And he was the first person to say, have you thought about becoming a singer at any point? I was babysitting his children, and he came home and said that in quite a drunk fashion. And it wasn't, and there were other kids at school who were all singing very seriously, and they had like an opera group and were doing concerts all over the place. And I wasn't ever part of that. I was always the one on the golf course or playing cricket or whatever, And then, so he came along, and then I did think about maybe actually I could do this. And then I was very, very lucky in that I went to a small university in Canterbury, and it just happened to be a place that Benjamin Luxon was somehow resident at. And so I studied with Ben's wife. Sheila was my singing teacher. And then we did several projects with Benjamin. Can you imagine, at 18 years old, you turn up and you have Benjamin Luxon directing you? He had a very sad incident where he'd gone deaf in his early 50s. He was doing a recital, actually, where I live now in London. He was doing a recital in the concert hall there, and just suddenly halfway through he couldn't hear the pitch, and he had to stop singing, and literally 7 days later he was completely deaf.
I was going to say, Matthew, that I greatly revere Benjamin Luxon, and was very happy that you listed him among the people you find inspiring on the list that I doubt your listeners can find on the show page. And I wanted you to talk about his sudden descent into deafness and how dramatic that was. I remember it very, very well.
I mean, because he wasn't just, he was a great opera singer. Britain wrote Owen Wingrave for him. He was part of the English opera group that Britain started. He was a mainstay at the Royal Opera House. He was singing, with Seiji Ozawa. He did so much with Seiji everywhere. He was on, and he was a national celebrity. He had a TV show and everything, and then suddenly his whole world his whole world of what he had been. I mean, I've been talking to someone today about this, about how we create, you do a certain thing, and that's your ego, and that's how people perceive you as being, because you spent 15 years doing this certain thing, and then suddenly you don't have that thing anymore. And then, either it's a struggle or it's an easy thing to find a way into another way of being, into living. But if it's, and he's got the most amazing charm and ego, Ben, and actually I knew him sort of 10 years after it had all gone wrong, and he seemed to be very comfortable with life and very happy with doing what he was doing, and he didn't seem to miss the singing. And so, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. We do these jobs and we think it's our everything, because while Matthew Rose, the opera singer, for the first 15 years of my career, that's all I did. I didn't take a break. I didn't stop doing this, and I loved it, and I wanted to do every single thing I could. And I was operas and recitals and concerts and stuff. And actually now, after 18 months of COVID hiatus, and now I have a whole summer off, actually I'm in a very happy place just to think, maybe that's not what makes me be me. And actually, if I was to do other things, it wouldn't be the end of the world, you know. So it's quite an interesting parallel with him. But he had suddenly, and he had no choice. He couldn't go back to it. You know, he suddenly lost the ability to do everything that made him what was him, you know. And what a I mean, it's one of the most beautifully natural voices. I mean, and I put that Silent Noon on because it literally is probably the piece. I mean, there are other singers maybe that you could say, you know, Janet Baker, who Ben recorded Rape of Lucretia with Britain. But, you know, there are maybe other great singers that one could choose. But that, for me, is one of the most beautiful, honest. It's the honesty in the singing. That's the thing. It's the honesty in the sound. It's just him as he is, making these sounds very genuinely from a very deep and personal place, and it's the most beautiful thing. And he's a very genuine and wonderful person, Ben. And you know, I'm grateful. You know, he lives up near in the Berkshires now, up near Tanglewood. And you know, I try and see him as much as I can.
In the United States, yeah.
He's just.
I knew him a lot in Boston, actually, and in the Berkshires. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question where I'm a New Yorker and you are someone born in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, England. And I've had the great pleasure, this is now 2022, I have lived, worked, studied in London since 1973 when I was a teenager. And I always say that the triangle of my life is New York City, London, and Italy, in that I've always had a presence in a lot of those places. The last place I was before COVID came, I was working at Covent Garden, and that was March of 2020. So I say this with all affection for the people of the United Kingdom, but there seems to be a very strong trend there to favor British artists. Maybe favor is not the right word, to have great appreciation for British artists, which is not a bad thing, in that there are many people working in the UK. You before described all the people you worked with coming up and all these wonderful churches that have music programs, music teachers and so on, which is all terrific. But I have found on certain occasions that I would mention people from other countries that I thought were very good. And I would be politely told that, well, no, that person just doesn't quite compare to this person who happens to be British. Really? Am I on a track on something, or have you, as a British person, not found that because you're in that environment?
So I mean, so after I was at school, I studied at Curtis, and I had
in Philadelphia.
A musical training where I was going to New York every week, and so I don't feel very much like I'm a British singer at all. I mean, I'm in a product of the American system, actually. I think that just shows that, you know, living on an island is kind of living on an island. You know, you don't go other places necessarily and realize that other things can be different and better in other places. So I think what you're saying is basically people that don't get out very much and just see what they see on their doorstep, you know. I mean, but the Royal Opera House has been a very international opera house. I mean, I think now with Brexit and the way the world is going in post-COVID, it's going to be harder to bring in the top international singers that they used to, you know, and the pound isn't very strong, and, you know, people don't make the money they would, you know. I know great singers who they make way much more money and have actually a better time in Madrid or somewhere like that. So I mean, I'm very hopeful that the Royal Opera House can be the great international opera house that it's been, and that we have all these great international singers, because it's so important. You can't just have the best of British, you know. And I somehow, and you see that as a trend actually happening through festivals and through orchestras. They just choose the best British people, and sometimes just the best young British people, to be part of something. And you know, I think the United Kingdom and London in particular, and places like Glyndebourne, and Glyndebourne's been so international always, and I think it will always be. But we deserve the best in the world coming to the UK to perform, and actually those people deserve to be there, because it is a wonderful place to perform, and you get treated incredibly well. But I think what you're talking about is just an ignorance, actually, and just people not knowing actually how much better things can be, you know, especially if they just went to the ENO or something. Then, you know, Valerie Masterton was the best singer they probably ever heard, and you know, being in New York and going to the Met every day, especially as it was up to 20 years ago, you heard the great singers of the world every single night in every single role. I was so lucky. I was a student at Curtis 98 to 2003, and every Monday I would have my lesson at Juilliard at 5 o'clock, and then trot over to the Met and get my $25 student ticket, whatever it was, and I would go every single Monday. And it was just every night was a like a gala performance. That's why this Don Carlos felt very special. It felt like the old Met, where every role was cast in the highest possible level, and it was amazing to being part of it. And Yannick was inspirational, and the way he made the orchestra sound was just incredible. So I think I'm up from a much more open view to that. I'm not all into this. I do appreciate greatly people from my country, and there are some amazing singers, amazing artists, amazing composers that people really don't appreciate as much as they should. Someone like Frank Bridge, who is as good a composer as anyone, actually, and why is his music not anywhere? Or Elgar. I was talking to a friend the other day about the Dream of Gerontius. Why is the Dream of Gerontius only done on our little island and not appreciated anywhere else? It's literally the piece that gets me the most excited as any. I think coming from different countries, you have different syndromes. So definitely the island syndrome of the United Kingdom. And, I think Brexit proved that there's a whole lot of people there that think we're the greatest things around and no one touches us. And I think that's what Brexit proves. Whereas luckily, as an internationalist, as someone that has been incredibly grateful for my international life, my ability to work and live through Europe freely and to benefit from everything like that, I think, I'm not the typical, I'm obviously not a Brexit voter. But I think that little islander mentality, sadly, is what exists in the UK. And I'm sorry if those people have offended you.
Well, no, they certainly haven't offended me. Although I will say that one time I was in a taxi in London and I was chatting with the driver. This was 15 years ago. Now, mind you, I went before the pandemic to London a lot. I've taught at Oxford. By the way, with Felicity Lott, I meant to mention that to you, that she and I did a program together a number of years ago at Oxford. But I remember the taxi driver said to me, "Well, you're quite intelligent for an American." And I said, "We have quite a few over here." But I didn't mind. I really genuinely didn't. But the second half of my question relates to something you raised. I, like you, feel that there is so much wonderful British music and art and tradition that is not known. We see the stereotypical things. We will get the occasional Peter Grimes and certain famous works by Benjamin Britten. Elgar infrequently. I adore the music of Ray Vaughan Williams. I just love it. I was named for Frederick Delius, another British composer. So I too believe that every country, large and small, have wonderful things. And the United Kingdom has a lot of fantastic music and musicians and traditions that I've been able to connect with and understand and admire. But I think my opinion is that that's part of why certain people are defensive about putting forward British musicians, because they might be better at doing British music. I'm not so sure about that, but I'll name one baritone, American baritone, Andrew Garland, who was my guest recently, is from Boston. He is fantastic at doing British music. He gets it. And so I think that it's about a lot more than just where you were born.
No, sure, but and it's a lot to do with your training. And being a British person, I've now worked in British conservatories and I've worked in British music schools and with lots of young British singers. And I also have the incredible privilege of having been trained at Curtis when it was, with Michael Eisen found me in a very small village in Italy, and somehow he heard two notes in my voice that he thought, aha, I can do something with that. And basically I went to Curtis and started from scratch, basically. But having been educated in that system and the seriousness that people take learning how to become a singer is kind of in the United States, it's remarkable. And all these people came from all around the world and somehow ended up in New York and San Francisco, wherever, and this great tradition of great singing that has existed in America over the last 100 years has come because there have been great people teaching things and passing on the very best information. I was incredibly lucky to study with Marlene. I still study with Marlene Malice, and she's.
Well, I saw
very,
last week.
Yeah. Oh, you saw
Yeah.
her last week.
Yeah.
I saw her. Yeah, I saw her, and I had an email at the moment I saw her. I was having dinner with her, and I got an email saying you have COVID. So I ran from her and Claudia very quickly. Oh, I think it was just after they'd been to Funny Girl with you, no?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But they're all safe, so it's fine.
Okay.
That's not a COVID cough.
Okay.
But I mean, the way Marlena teaches, the way holistically she gets people to make these incredibly. I mean, and I said, she's someone that sort of inspires me to do the teaching that I do, and I'm going to her course in Chautauqua in a couple of weeks, and I sit in her lessons and stuff, and she's been an amazing inspiration to me. But the way she can fully understand how a human body can make the best, most wonderful musical sounds is incredible. And that's a very rare gift anywhere. But it seems to be in New York, that was the place where these things were very rife, and there were many people that can do this. And I don't think in London that was necessarily the case. People became great singers just because they became great singers, not because the training was incredible. So I think coming up from an American system where the training is so incredible and so thorough and people take it so seriously, whereas maybe in the UK they have a different sensitivity, a different intellectual take on how to make music. A lot of people come from Cambridge, Oxford, and become singers, and just because the willpower to do something brilliantly makes them sing well. It's a completely different system, and I feel so privileged to have been part of both of the systems. And actually, I was doing a course in Italy where I wanted half British singers, half half American singers to be together, just so they could just be with each other and just see how the different approaches, because there's some brilliant British singers, but they don't have the thorough training that exists in America. It's a completely different way that they're trained, and so to bring them together and for people to learn and take from each, and actually the Americans to see you can be less serious about making music and have a bit more fun, and it's really important that we have this melange of ways how to train, especially. And I'd love to talk to you more about what are the important things of being an opera singer are into the future, and what do we really need to focus on, and what do we really need to care about? I mean, I don't, the whole image thing seems to have taken over, and it's what image can you present? You can, they
I'm
want
going to stop you for 1 second because I do want to go there, but there is a technical question that you might be the perfect person to ask. I've worked with a lot of British trained opera singers, which is to say maybe people from elsewhere like Finland, but who studied in the UK. And many of them seemed in Italian to be trained to use the letter E, as in Edward, in a different sound than Italians and Americans use that sound. Very specifically, A-M-O-R-E, amore is how we would say it. But very often in the UK, it's amori. And I've noticed that there's a different E sound, the letter E. Do you have any idea how that happens? Because I can always mark someone as British trained if they do that.
That's the thing. I mean, I think the way we naturally speak our languages and think about our languages obviously influences how we sing in the sounds that we make. What we do are vehicles for the. I mean, all we want to do, this is why the Italian training and the whole idea of singing with Italian technique is so important, because you have those 5 very simple vowels that if you can master and then manipulate slightly to everything else, then you're using naturally, physically, the sounds that are most easy to get across and to get out of your body. I mean, when I'm singing in English, I try and do very pure vowel. You don't need any diphthongs, I don't think, in English when you sing, and just to have these very Italianate, long vowels as part of it, and that's such an important thing. I don't, there is in New York, there's this whole school of Italian bel canto technique that is taught, and that's not really what exists. In London, there may be a handful of teachers that do that, but it's not the nuts and bolts of what every singer should have in their armory to become a great opera singer. And then the whole use of body and abdominal support, that's something also that isn't really thought about in the UK at all, actually. It's such a big thing. I went to the University of Michigan a few years ago to do a masterclass, and just to hear 17, 18-year-olds that could just very naturally make this very easy sound just because they're activating the abdominal muscles in a way that sound is produced very easily. And, I go to the UK and sort of talk to young singers about this stuff. No one even mentions this stuff. It's really interesting what is taught in certain places. And then there's a reason why all these great American singers are all over the world singing in all the major theatres because they've been given the right, and it's a combination of the tools that you need to be a singer, and you have to do all these things at the same time. That's the thing, you can't just pick and choose. And that's very seriously and wonderfully taught in America, and maybe less so. Maybe individual teachers in different places do that, but as a rule, it's not generally how people think about singing as it is in the United States.
So you began to introduce the topic that I was going to go to, but I'm going to postpone it by 3 minutes because there's one other British artist I want to talk to you about who I admired. I never met him. I met him, I shook his hand, but I didn't know him. He was revolutionary in his way, was Sir Colin Davis, the conductor, with whom you recorded Berlioz, who Sir Colin was one of the leading advocates of Berlioz, well ahead of most other people, and conducted very famous productions at Covent Garden and in New York and so on. And I tried at a certain point, late-ish in his career, to reach out to him, and I wanted to converse with him the way you and I are conversing. And he at that point sort of politely said no. But therefore, I never had the experience of knowing Colin Davis and understanding his work and his approach and apparently his temper on occasions. What was your experience with Colin Davis?
Yeah, so I was very lucky, sort of very early on in my career, to do several projects. So we did, the first thing I did him with the L'Enfance du Christ, which was recorded and was incredible. And then I did Mozart Requiems with him. We did Tora, Missa Solemnis, Otello. I was very lucky in the last years of his life to have worked with him, as I was with Charles Mackerras, who's a much bigger influence to me than Colin Davis, actually. And I'd love to talk about Charles Mackerras. But he was just a very gentle, he was a complete gentleman. And, he was just, he was with the London Symphony Orchestra, which was his orchestra. And it was basically, ladies and gentlemen, let's just get on with it and let's just do it as we do it. There was nothing forced, there was nothing pushed. Everything was very relaxed. I mean, the Missa Solemnis we did, it was hilarious. So I did the Missa Solemnis we did it in, was it still Alice Tully, David Geffen Hall. I did it with Colin Davis one year, and then John Eliot Gardner the next year in Carnegie Hall or something. And John Eliot Gardner's was exactly half the speed, or twice the speed, I should say, as Colin Davis. So, and I remember the soprano saying, please, can we go a bit faster? And he said, please indulge an old man. So he was, he was, I don't know, he had a long career in music, and, he was a great guy to be making music with a London orchestra where there's not lots of time to rehearse, and you just want to get up there and do it as spiritually as possible. The child of our time, that was remarkable, actually. That was the most amazing thing. I did that with him a few times.
That's Tippett, yes?
Tippett, yeah, exactly. Tippett, and he was a big advocate for Tippett's music. He was probably the biggest advocate for Tippett's music, actually. And to do that piece with him particularly, and he just had it in him. It was just, it's a very interesting piece that there's 5 spirituals that come throughout the piece, and just that was like a holy experience doing that with him. Actually, he had some kind of reverence and holiness to his persona that was incredible. I mean, and he just let the music happen. He wasn't something. So I'm much more of a person that likes to get on with it, and if you find a tempo, keep that tempo and go with it and making it exciting. That's the way I like to make music. He was very much more, he knitted and things like that, and had an iguana. He was one of those kind of people. I'm sure he had a pipe as well. He was a very calm, collected guy that just let things happen. Whereas I'm, as you can tell by the way I speak as well, I like to get on with things and have impetus and I think so we were very different places, but still it was a privilege to work with him.
I'm interested to hear to say he was kind of mellow, because he famously was rather tempestuous earlier in his career.
Yeah, and then he realized, it's interesting. I don't know I think it was on Desert Island Discs, the lovely program, and he realized he had a moment of self-awareness. He realized he wasn't happy. He was treating people in this way that didn't make him happy, and he thought, if I'm going to continue to do this job, I need to change. So he made a conscious choice not to be like that anymore, and to become this nice, wonderful. But it's amazing to read, actually, and for someone to articulate that, and just to have that stream of consciousness where they want to change how they are and how they are. So yeah.
I wonder if Toscanini ever had that realization.
Not with his double basses.
No.
I was in the car the other day with a friend. I was playing that famous thing where he's shouting at the contrabassi.
Yeah. So Charles Mackerras, who I did know and I really admired, talk about him.
I think there's two people that greatly influenced me as a young singer. So when I went to the Young Artist Program in Covent Garden, Tony Pipano was there, and to watch him work on a daily basis and see him rehearse and see the way he thought about opera and drama and music being made was phenomenal. And then I was very lucky, again, the last years of Charles Mackerras' life, I was doing 10, 20 projects with him each year. For some reason he was very fond of me, and I was so fond of him. Whenever I'm a little bit down, I go and sit outside his house and think of him, because and listening back to his recordings, actually on the flight over yesterday, for some reason, and it's not an opera that I love very much, but I decided just to listen to his Cosi, and it's just the way he, especially Mozart, but not just especially Mozart, because he got every kind of music. That's the thing, the versatility of that, and that's why I put one of the tracks as him doing Elgar. But you listen to him do Mozart, it's perfect. Every tempo is perfect, and he just finds a tempo, and then he goes, it's like clockwork. He finds something, and then he just lets the clockwork unfold, and the music shines like literally nobody else. And it's the same with his Beethoven, it's the same with his Janacek, and it's the same with his Elgar. It's, I mean, I know it's a ridiculous thing to say, and luckily through lockdown, those 18 months, all I basically did was buy and listen to CDs. And the number of times I put Charles Mackerras recordings on and just think it doesn't get better than this. I mean, the guy didn't record with the great orchestras in the world. He didn't have these massive, great big record contracts. But for me, he was the greatest conductor that ever lived, because he just got to the essence of the music, believed in it, believed in the humanity of it, and got on with it in a very sincere and unegoistic way, actually. He just let it unfold. I mean, I did lots and lots of Beethoven nines with him, and just to sit there, we always used to come after the second movement, but just to see him do the third movement into the fourth movement, he would do the whole fourth movement basically in one tempo. It was amazing, the tempo relationships that he managed to create. He didn't ever wallow in the music, is what I'm basically saying, and I'm a non-wallower myself, and I'm sure that's because of his influence, and just the honesty of just trusting what these amazing people, these composers are the amazing ones. We're the servants of these people that have put down on a page this incredible stuff. What you don't need to mess about with Schubert or Beethoven or Mozart. It's just there, trusting what you have. And also in Wagner, I mean, that's my big thing now, is I've started to do some Wagner rules, and just the amount of slowing up and wallowing. It is wallowing in the glory of Wagner rather than just doing what's on the page. He doesn't say slow down at every single cadence. You hear it again. Why I put the Boulez recording on the list is because there's a performance where literally Boulez was, no, we're not going to do what everyone's done for the last 100 years. We're going to just look at the music and just go with it. And oh my word, it's the most exciting thing in the world when you do that. And Charles, I was trying to find desperately a recording of Charles Mackerras doing Valkyrie, and I'm sure it's there, because he literally conducted everything brilliantly. He was the guy that brought Handel back into the repertoire. He's the one that decided to do Mozart in the way Mozart was done in Mozart's time. And
Janacek. A lot of Janacek.
Especially the Janacek. He won this scholarship. He won this scholarship to go and study in Prague, and he brought Janacek to the world, basically. Especially with those great recordings with the Vienna Philharmonic in the early 80s. And I feel so privileged. He, of all people, he is the guy I'm more proud of and more grateful to have spent time with. And whenever I'm teaching or anything, I'm always thinking, what would Sir Charles do? And if I'm trying to find a tempo for an aria, I get.
Well, he was Sir Charles, but he told me he was a New Yorker, because
he was in Poughkeepsie.
He grew up in New York State.
No, I think he was just very lucky. He was just born in Poughkeepsie, I think, and then very early they went back to Australia very early
Schenectady.
Schenectady. That's one. Yeah. I knew it's one of those up there.
Yeah. But he said to me, no, he said, I'm not saying this to flatter you, but in spirit, I'm a New Yorker. And I mean, the way you were describing New York before in terms of our musical traditions here, maybe he connected to that as well. And maybe that's why you feel a connection to him, whatever it is about how music is done here. And I'm not being a New Yorker taking pride, because I'm an internationalist as you are. But people feel certain places. I've always said that lucky is the man who is born in the place where he's supposed to be. Almost as lucky as the man who may be born somewhere but finds where he's supposed to be and spends time there. Less lucky is the man who never gets to be in the place he's meant to be. And I feel that way about myself. And Italy.
but he came to New York and he did some incredible stuff with the orchestra of St. Luke's, but it wasn't the New York Philharmonic where, had he had an orchestra like, I mean, that's the thing, but maybe he wouldn't have been happy or comfortable. He was very comfortable at Welsh National Opera with that company. He did, lots of years of work with them, with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, for 20, 30 years. He was, maybe he just felt happier in those and it was only at the very end of his life, after he was 80, that he made his debuts in the Berlin Phil and stuff. And we did a recording in Dresden with him, and that was the first time he'd been with the Staatskapelle there. And it's interesting, isn't it? What makes a great man? Is it someone that goes and works at the very, very highest level and creates something, or is it someone that works at a slightly different level and creates something even more extraordinary as a result of that, but not with the very, very top people? It's such a fascinating business, ours, isn't it? And
I agree with you. And now I want to get to what you began to introduce that I certainly want to ask you about, the future of this art form of opera that we love, and what needs to be done from your point of view, and what is being done well also. Especially with the whole, so it sort of it all seems to happen at the same time, I think. So the HD and the real taking these cinema level performances into the cinema, and that happened at exactly the same time that the record industry was sort of becoming less and less important. And the record industry was incredible for our industry because it put out these megastars that people became, everyone knew who these people were because they had record deals, and the record companies needed to sell records, so they put their pictures everywhere. So at the same time as that sort of quieting down, we had this whole desire to stick people in 80-foot high faces on video screens. When one goes to a cinema and sees something, is one moved as much as one is moved when you're in the house and hearing these things done live? I don't think so. And I worry that the focus has become too much on, maybe we don't have to worry about how people look and the perfection of how people look, whatever, that's something. But the perfection in sound production without having the same emotional context to what the words and what the drama and what the music actually wants to portray. And that's, for me, is what has to be into the future. If we're going to keep doing this stuff, and it's going to be appreciated as much as it needs to be, and it has to be, because these are some of the greatest things that ever were created. That if there was a time when the Marriage of Figaro isn't performed, then that's going to be a very sad time. So I really think that, and I do a lot of work with young singers and stuff, and for me the most important thing is understanding this text, and it's not just thinking about the text, it's understanding how we can feel the music in this text, and how we can then therefore create something that moves people to tears. And that's what's going to bring people back. Seeing nice, pretty, perfect pictures and sounds on a video screen is, that's what the rest of the world is. That's what film is. That's what everything else is. We have something unique in that we can move people emotionally. That's the thing. We have to realize how sound can emotionally move someone if it's done in the right, committed way. And that's the thing for me that has to be the future of what we do. Even though we all think it's about all these gimmicks and about social media and about all these other things, no, what is great about music when it is performed, music drama when it is performed, it's the emotional content of something that hearing Lisa Davidson now singing Ariadne, I've never been so wowed by a sound, but it's because she means everything, and she has this amazing physique and this amazing voice and everything, but she means every word. Lisa Davidson is a Norwegian soprano, still in her 30s, and already a once-in-a-generation singer.
She's the singer of the century, that's for sure. I'm obsessed. I went to every single one of those Ariadnes. I sat in the front row trying to work it all out. I went to about 4 Electras as well. And that's and if she can do it, actually, I think that more people can do it. That we just need to get into our bodies more and believe in something much deeper than just in our egoistic singing selves. It's and maybe in a smaller theatre it's easier to do that, but especially at the Met we need much more of that. It needs to be, it needs to be the focus. That's what the new generation need to be trained to do. No matter what they look like, no matter who they are, they have to be people that understand music, how music can move people, and then stick words in with that and create something magical. That's what's going to keep all this stuff going, I think.
I think that plus musical literacy. I was trained as a stage director. That's my background. But I have always believed that the music comes first. And when I teach opera, I often don't use the visual at all. I only use recordings. And the reason is I somehow, as a kid, listening to the Metropolitan Opera broadcast every Saturday, became a stage director in my head. And my grandmother and other relatives said to me, her name is Mimi, and she has a cough and her hand is cold. And my grandmother would just give me enough to know what was going on. And I heard in the music, I didn't speak Italian then, what the emotions were. And the moment when perhaps Mimi and Rodolfo fall in love. And that was where I begin to get into the drama and the emotions of the story. Then, of course, it's putting it on the stage and costumes and lighting and scenery and all of that. But it has to start with the music. HDs have their place, but nothing will ever replace the sound of unamplified opera singing in a theater with great acoustics like the Met. In the past 2 days, I went to the Met, the season's ending, and I heard Quinn Kelsey and Rigoletto, whom I've heard before in other theaters, but not in the Met's acoustics. Erin Morley, wonderful as Gilda. Quinn Kelsey is the Rigoletto of the moment, and deservedly so. Last night, Akhenaten by Philip Glass, with Anthony Roth Costanzo, who was my guest here in April, and a wonderful cast, but entirely different sounds, vocal sounds and so on, and orchestral sounds where it could not be more different from Giuseppe Verdi. And yet in that live space, that was so thrilling to hear this. But that's number one. Number two, I, as a member of the audience, could look at what I chose to look at on both nights. What happens with HD is that there's a director for the screen who decides what you look at as an audience member. And therefore, the active engagement that happens when we in the audience can choose, for example, as I did recently with you, to look at the monk, because I know the opera, I know the role, and I wanted to see how the monk is played and directed. But also, I've liked your work, though I've never met you and been with you and worked with you, but I've followed you for a long time. So I could point my interest there, whereas at another point, somebody would be looking at Matthew Polenzani as Carlo. And that's Carlos, and that's perfectly justified as well. Audience members engage more actively when they're in a live theater than they do with a mediation of a screen. Even the screen that you and I are using today, although it's beneficial that I can talk to you from New York, you're in Florida, and people are watching us all over the world. I'm glad for that. But this is not opera, this is a conversation. Mm-hmm. But for opera, it has to be live sound. That's, to me, the most important thing of all.
But I mean, in a way, it's great that these things exist and that you can go, you know, like I was just walking past Sarasota Opera House and they're showing things from Munich and Vienna and La Scala. It's great because people, obviously, if they live in Sarasota all the time, they're not going to be able to go there. It's nice that that exists.
Although that said, they have a wonderful opera company and they specialize in Verdi every winter.
Yeah, but that it shouldn't be given such importance. It's just a nice thing that happens on the side of the main, you know, 99% of the focus of what the Met should do is on live performance, and it's really nice that these broadcasts happen. But I mean, and I'm sorry, Peter Gelb, if you're watching, but I really am. But for me, what is much more important is what happens live in the house, and that, you know, that 1% of fantasticness that an HD can take around the world. Great, but you know, we need to get people bums on seats in these live theatres. But it's an education thing again. You know, like you said, you sat at home with your grandmother and she was explaining what was going in the opera. Every child in the world, wouldn't it be great if that could be the same thing they could experience every Saturday, is have someone explain what's going on? You know, I don't know why we think people are just going to get opera or get song recitals or get orchestral music. You know, it's something that needs to be explained and understood. You know, I think we think that if we dumb down or don't give hyper complicated productions and we slightly dumb it down and make it super easy for audiences, that's going to bring audiences into the theatre for the first time. So first of all, I don't think that's the case, and second of all, you're not serving the most important people, which is the regular opera goer, which especially in New York City is something of a traditional, you know, what I love most being at the Met is being in the intermission and just sitting in a seat and hearing all these conversations around me of people that obviously had a grandmother like you did at home, and they understand what this stuff's all about. They get opera. They're brilliant people. They should be given stuff that intellectually and musically inspires them, because they're not given enough credit. We don't give enough credit, especially in New York, to this amazing audience that was curated through the 70s and 80s, and were, basically what James Levine was.
It was the 1920s.
Well, back to the 1920s. But
when I was performance manager of the Met, I knew people whose seats went back to the old Met pre-1966, whose family subscribed, and they remained in the same family because it was such a family tradition to go.
And but this existed, and what James Levine did was to educate people into understanding what great opera is, and he did this diverse range of opera, the way he took Mozart seriously, the way he took Schoenberg seriously, the way he took Berg seriously, all Kurt Weill, all these things were, he created a place where he had an audience that trusted him to put on work that they knew would expand their lives and the breadth of everything. And he, I think, and with the team at the time, they obviously understood how amazing the New York audiences were, and what they were able to take in, and that's why the Met was thriving into the early 2000s, because there was this, and every night you go and everyone was on subscription, you could never get a ticket. It was basically full, wasn't it, every single night. And I think I'm going to get myself into trouble today, but never mind. I've got nothing to lose. I really think that we need to take the essence of what opera is much more seriously than thinking that the glamour of what it is and the simplification of how it should be represented is important and good for the future. No, I think people want something, it's amazing, this stuff, Verdi opera, just take these Verdi operas, they're all amazing. I know that. And, we just have to trust people, give it to them in its best possible form, do it brilliantly with complete conviction and brilliance, and then that's how we create audience. It's not about gimmicks and tricks and about let's have a couple of fancy people in the cast and that's going to sell things. We have to create something much bigger on a worldwide basis. There are opera houses in the world, like the Deutsche Oper in Berlin, for instance, where they're very risky with their productions. They're doing a whole Meyerbeer series right now, because they have an audience they can trust, and they know that people are going to turn up and see stuff because they can trust them, rather than opera houses where they're doing hundreds of performances of Traviata and Butterfly because they're worried about not getting an audience, and only if they do this very popular stuff will people come, they think, and that's a danger for our world.
It also helps that in Germany there's funding for these things in a way that America we have to do all this fundraising. You mentioned Meyerbeer. My guest last year, I'm remembering her name is Elaine Thornton, who wrote she's British, a wonderful biography of Meyerbeer, which if you haven't read it, I commend it to you.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to circle back to something you said in passing that I heard, I have good hearing, Cosi fan tutte, because we're talking about Mozart. I think I heard you say that it's not your favorite Mozart, and James Levine, when he was away with illness for quite a while and he could come back to the Met and he had disabilities by then, Cosi fan tutte is a long opera. It's 2 long acts and it's quite long. That was the opera that he wanted to return with. I think he felt it would provide musically for him the most joy and interesting challenges. I was going to raise Cosi with you in a different context. So we were talking about Don Carlos, that there are ambiguous endings, and often it's the stage director who steps in and says, this is how it will end. The other leading example of that in all opera, in my view, is Cosi fan tutte, where you don't change the words, you don't change the music, but depending how you stage it, you have an entirely other outcome. And I must say that I watch productions, I enjoy listening always. It's glorious music. The story can be criticized, although I find a lot to admire. But how the stage director sees the end and how she or he puts it on the stage and then how the performers do it is always astonishing to me. There was a production by Fela McDermott at the Met recently. I love his work. And it was a very different ending. I don't want to give it away in case people come and see it. The production I'd seen before I was involved with was in Salzburg, and that was yet another ending. And every time a smart stage director comes along and sees the same words and music in new ways, I find exhilarating. And that's why I returned to Cosi fan tutte, because everything in the opera leads to that moment. And if you stage everything intelligently and you have 6 great artists, because you need that, and a great conductor, then it works. I think maybe, and you tell me if I'm wrong, the Cosi might not appeal to you because it's very hard to do it well, and I've seen many mediocre performances.
And so, and the Act One finale is so fantastic. I have to say, I must have been to. It's not an opera I've been to lots. I mean, I remember I must have got to the end about 3 times. So I'm sorry to say, because normally after Act One, you've seen there's no new characters to come. You've had an hour and 40 minutes of great Mozart's music. I don't feel. Yeah, I haven't got to Act Two very often, Fred. Is basically what I'm trying to say. But then
you'll love it.
It is remarkable, and what happens in Act Two is actually amazing. And I wish I had more patience for it. It's also, I wish I'd sung Guglielmo. It's not something at Curtis when I was 18 or 19 or something. I sang Don Alfonso, which was fine, but and it is a proper bass. Guglielmo, for some reason they all cast it as a light baritone, but actually it's Benucci, who sang it first of all, was a proper bass singer, and that's maybe it had. There's a lot of these operas that, like Don Giovanni, I'm sure is much more fun to be in than it is to watch. I'm pretty sure, and I'm probably Cosi maybe the same. But, yeah.
They're the hardest. I think Don Giovanni is the hardest opera to direct. I think that Le Nozze di Figaro is very hard. I think Cosi is hard because Da Ponte's libretti are so quicksilver, and you have to respond to all that. And Mozart's music responded to that nature of the libretti, and they're impossibly hard, but when achieved well, they're brilliant. And frankly, my head goes in certain directions, and I was going to talk to you about something a while ago, and Cosi fan tutte brings me there.
Okay.
Not far from Seaford and Lewis is a place called Glyndebourne, a festival which is world famous now, was created in the 1930s with a production of Cosi fan tutte. And they could have chosen any opera in the world, and they chose that one, maybe because there are only 6 characters, they considered it more doable, but also because at that time, Cosi fan tutte was looked at as a naughty little sex farce, and not with all the psychological complexity that we know it has. And they were bringing something that the British public did not see. But my question for you is, I've worked in many, many places. I've worked for Glyndebourne, but never in Glyndebourne. I still have not been there. I know I have an open invitation, but you grew up very close to Glyndebourne. How old were you when you first went? Was it part of your musical training as a boy and a young man? And I know you've worked there, so talk about Glyndebourne.
Yeah, so I've been incredibly lucky, and Glyndebourne is a very important place for me, so I'd like to talk about that properly. So actually, as a youngster, going to the opera wasn't something we ever thought about. I mean, my mum was very musical, but going to the opera wasn't something they probably ever thought about doing. So I think I went to Glyndebourne the first time when I was 20 or something. And that was just through friends. The first thing I ever did, though, for Glyndebourne, when I was at school, we auditioned to be the 3 boys in the Magic. The Peter Sellers did a production in 1991, I think, of the Magic Flute, and I did audition to be one of the 3 boys and didn't get the part. For which there are some people who, Brian Dickey particularly, who was there at the time, I give him a hard time for that. How dare you not give me the part of the second boy? So growing up, I mean, it's a very beautiful part of the world, and Glyndebourne just happens to be one of the many wonderful things around there. But so when I finished Curtis in 2003, and I came back to the UK to do at Garsington Opera. They were doing Die Schweigsame Frau, and I was very lucky that Anne Murray, who I'd done some masterclasses, Richard Strauss, Anne Murray had heard me in some masterclasses and suggested that I should get the part in that. So I came back after finishing at Curtis. I'm not in the graduation photo because I came back to do Die Schweigsame Frau in England. And because I was doing that, an agent, Colin Ure, he lives in Chicago now, he heard about me and rang me up and said, would you like to be managed by me? And I said, well, I've never met you. Maybe we should do that at some point. He said, okay, don't worry about that. Just come to Cardiff next Wednesday. It's Cardiff Sing of the World is on. I want you to sing for Matthew Epstein. Who else was there? Paul Moe was there from Glyndebourne. and Brian McMaster was there from the Edinburgh Festival, and literally me getting on a train and going to Cardiff.
So just for listeners to know, you describe, although I could do it, what is Cardiff and what does that mean in the opera world?
Also, so every 2 years, the BBC do a competition called Cardiff Singer of the World, and it's a competition that people come when they're available and sing. I'm not big into competitions, and sometimes great singers win competitions and have great careers. That's how it works. It's not like competitions train people to be brilliant. So it just happened to be that these great. So Brian McMaster was running Edinburgh Festival at the time. Paul Moe, head of casting at Glyndebourne, Matthew Epstein, opera guru of the world, and Paul Moe. I just happened to sing Bottom's Dream from Midsummer Night's Dream, and Paul Moe, obviously they were casting Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was 24 at the time maybe, and somehow Paul Moe thought, why don't we give this 24-year-old the chance to sing Midsummer Night's Dream at Glyndebourne, which is, nowhere else in the world would do that, of such an international reputable place. Glyndebourne is unique, or not unique, but I would say it is unique for giving amazing chances to people that haven't already proved themselves. Pavarotti went there when he was nothing, basically.
Well, Wexford too.
Wexford too, but
yeah.
But somehow, I don't know about Wexford. So I just know that Glyndebourne over the years, Marilla Franey, all these people, they've given chances to people that other opera houses would never, ever, ever think about doing. There's no way any other opera house in the world would have given me the role of Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream, in Peter Hall's thing. I did it when I was 26 is when we did it. And that was literally the first thing I did before I was even at the Young Artist program at Covent Garden. I'd been given that role to do. Can you imagine? And it basically opened the door for me for everything. Midsummer Night's Dream is an opera I've done a lot. Bottom is a role that I adore every second of. I think I've done 27 different times or something around the world, and I've done it at the Met and in Philadelphia now, and in Houston, in La Scala. I was supposed to have done it in Vienna, but COVID stopped that. And it's the piece, because of those performances at Glyndebourne, I was then able to go around the world and do this opera, which then led for me to have this very nice career. So I could not be more grateful for what Glyndebourne is and for the chance they took on me. And I've been very lucky. I've done some incredibly wonderful things there. We did a Rape of Lucretia, but there's a DVD of with Alan Clayton, who's now Mr. Hamlet at the moment. But that was one of the most special things, again, with a whole group of wonderful friends and colleagues. The Rake's Progress I did there with Vladimir Yurovsky, again, one of the highlights of my career, to do that David Hockney production, which is just, it's miraculous. And it tells the story so, of a very opaque, difficult opera. It explains it very well. And, it's always sold out in seconds. It's the only place in the world that can sell Rake's Progress out. Everywhere else they struggle to fill any seats, actually. To have done that with Vladimir, Vladimir's one of my, he's championed me in an incredible way, and I'm so grateful for everything he's done for me, Vladimir. And he's a great friend and a great man. Poliuto and then Midsummer Night's Dream again, and then the Don Giovanni. I've done an awful lot of really wonderful work at Glyndebourne. It's a wonderful opera house. You have amazing rehearsal facilities. You have this beautiful, in the breaks. I'm a big frisbee guy. You can go out and play frisbee across the lawn. That's my big thing. There are videos, and just to have that audience. This audience is coming, and they get world-class opera, but they also get a world-class experience around it. They go to this very beautiful place. The food is amazing. Everything, it's the best £350 you could ever spend. I don't know what the ticket prices are, but it's worth every penny of what you pay to be there. And that place means so much for me. And the fact that it's, walking, I used to walk there from my home, it's walking distance from Seaford. It's a 10-mile walk, but, I'm so proud of what that place is. And, unfortunately, there's sort of because Glyndebourne was so successful, now there's another 47 different summer opera festivals in the UK, sort of taking away from what Glyndebourne uniquely was doing, and, I kind of feel sorry for it in a way that Glyndebourne has to deal with all this competition, so to speak, because of his own success and because of this amazing product that it's given. And I wish that place as much good as anywhere in the world, actually, and what that Christie family has done for.
I was about to say the Christie family is like the royal family of British opera. That it's both a generational. I'm a good friend of Danielle Denise, who is American, Australian, British soprano, married to the current Christie and mother of the next generation of Christies. And it's a wonderful thing to watch.
and George and Mary, who I never worked under George's watch. He handed over the reins in 2000. Gus was being there, but George and Mary were two. We all get the train from London from Lewes Station, and there's very few people you're like desperate to find on Lewes the platform at Lewes Station to spend an hour on the train with. But if I could have time with them, I would, and I would go to their house for Sunday lunches, drinking whatever. Just people that got opera people, understood exactly what is needed, both as an institution and as a place that deals with individual human beings. I mean, the whole way we're treated as individuals is so important, and maybe not necessarily everywhere in the world do people really care about the human aspect of being an opera singer and having to do this job away from home that's very stressful and blah blah blah. They got it. George used to go and pick people up himself from Heathrow Airport. He was just a remarkable man that knew how to get the best out of people and how to treat people. And I feel so privileged to have spent so much time with them. Again, this generation that they both sadly died. And the last thing I did at Glyndebourne was Mary's memorial service last year. And it just proves that our business can thrive and succeed when people do it right, and they do it with the thing is you have to have love. If you don't have love for this, which only comes through appreciation, then there's no point in doing it. And they loved it. They loved the people that did it. They loved the people that came to watch it, and it's such an inspiration for me with what I want to do into the future is to see how they ran that company. And it felt like a family. That's the thing, as a result.
I think you would like Wexford as well. It has a similar flavor. It's more recent, but it's also from 1950, so it's not exactly new. Yes, opera is entirely about the human spirit and the human potential. And when I try to teach that to people, and I try to explain that using technology as an intermediary is not necessarily the same as human contact. I can tell you, frankly, with COVID, that I have not had it, but it changes the whole physicality of how people in opera interact with one another, because we tend to be very affectionate and, hugging and all that. And it's kept people apart for understandable reasons. And it's imposed all kinds of requirements in theaters. The Met, frankly, has done very well, I think, in getting performances on every night, no matter what, and it has a good bench of singers who can come on. You stepped in to play Philip II, which is not.
That's only because he had a bad knee. It was because he had COVID.
Bad knee. But what I mean is, understudies.
I missed the last two Lucias because Christian came and did that, which was to have someone like Christian come and do that is amazing, isn't it?
Right. To have Christian Van Horn step in for Matthew Rose is good casting.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've noticed, especially in the past couple of years, the degree to which colleagues support one another. And there's the wonderful American tenor Lemmy Pulliam, who has been stepping in for people and getting the notice that he deserves. He's having a lot of challenges in his own life, but nonetheless, he steps up, and audiences and colleagues have been very supportive, and he's given back with these wonderful performances. So it's a live human endeavor. And in a world that's increasingly mechanized and separated, this communal feeling, whether it's the people working on the stage, whether it's the audience, whether it's that relationship that happens as well, or as you described, the way certain audiences really talk and feel opera, that is irreplaceable. I know that you like different sports, and I love my baseball, and you played cricket. And there is that feeling.
I definitely do not play cricket anymore.
No, I understand.
That hurts. Cricket is a painful game. Don't play cricket, people.
Oh, I gather. But the thing is that, there's a certain, baseball and opera have very similar experiences in terms of the protagonism, in terms of the crowd relationship and so on. And in the United States, many people who love baseball love opera and vice versa, and don't necessarily love American football or ballet or other things. But that's the goal here, is to keep it live, not only alive, but to keep opera live. I think you and I share that.
And unfortunately, I think during the pandemic, people didn't think about this stuff enough before they pressed the go button, and there was a surplus of everything. I mean, I never ever, and I know we're doing this as a live broadcast, and it would be interesting to see how many people watched it. I never ever have to watch another performance on a screen ever again. I'm sorry to say, and I just need to be in a room and feel those vibrations, and just be with people doing extraordinary things in a room. I don't need to sit and watch it on a video screen. And there was just everyone, they panicked and didn't know what to do, and they just did way too much. And it's kind of, so maybe that's a good thing actually, that it's sort of suppressed people's desire to sit on a screen and watch an opera. And it's I don't know, it seems to me that the Met is doing very well in getting bumps on seats. I mean, the Lucia from the stage, it seemed like that was selling very well actually for something I didn't think would sell very well. And the fact that Ariadne of Naxos, which is an opera that is impossible to sell, was virtually full for the last few performances, sort of says a lot to me about what people are thirsty for. And they're thirsty for live, incredible sounds and committed performances and wonderful conducting and a wonderful orchestra. And in New York, you get that in abundance. So.
Well, it didn't hurt having Lisa Davidson as Ariadne, and in the case of your Lucia cast, the whole cast up and down was special. And therefore, even though I will speak of one, Artur Rucinski is not as well known as he deserves to be, you, Nadine Sierra, Javier Camarena are known quantities, but Artur really had a breakout performance as
he's the great baritone in the world, I think, and just the efficiency and the ease of his singing is it's remarkable. I mean, one could question his taste on occasions, but
but that's okay.
No, exactly. But at least he's making choices and doing things that are exciting. It's wonderful. It's not something I would do because I'm very much into doing what composers write. I'm not brave enough, or I'm based. I don't have to make those choices. It's great.
One thing with the opera Lucia, not what you think I'm going to ask. Riccardo Frizza, who was my guest last year, and he and I are friends. I have to say that in disclosure as we talk about him, is that he's the head of the Donizetti Festival. And I went 3 times during this run. And the sound of the orchestra and the degree to which still weeks later I can hear. During Akhenaten last night, suddenly Lucia came into my ears, and that's no judgment of Akhenaten, but so powerful was his performance and his leadership. Would you talk about the rehearsal process, specifically about Riccardo Frizza and Donizetti?
I mean, to be honest, there wasn't much of a rehearsal process generally. So.
Okay.
But he's very, he doesn't wallow in it. He looks at what's on the page and he believes in it. He doesn't slow. You hear all these recordings. I'm sorry, Richard Bonning's recordings. They're fantastic. Whatever. And with Jane Sutherland, they're amazing. But they have to cut it all because they're wallowing in certain things that make it not exciting. If you just trust in Donizetti and you don't cut it to bits and you understand that he repeats things because it's a dramatic reason to doing stuff, and we did a completely uncut, it was almost uncut Lucia, and he got on with it. He didn't slow down and wallow in it. And isn't it fantastic? Enrique Mazzola is also something, I've done a few things with Enrique, and he again is someone that does this music, but he trusts in Donizetti. We don't have to make Donizetti less than he is to make him great, and that's what, this is the great thing that's happened. So it first of all happened with Mozart in the 50s, whatever, 60s, and with Verdi and Donizetti and other things. Now I'm hopeful for Wagner that we can now do the same with him and get these, when you see Marek Janowski conducting Ariadne and just getting on with it, and it's just brilliant. You don't need to wallow in music to make it exciting. Actors, when they wallow in text, don't make fantastic actors, I don't think. So what he did was
I'm going to ask you very specifically because
he gave it momentum, and he trusted in what this momentum can create and in what Donizetti wanted, rather than slowing down to point out how brilliant Donizetti is all the time. I think that's with Wagner people. I think they all like to be shown how brilliant Wagner is by over highlighting it. And I think Wagner was into making incredibly exciting music drama, and it just happens to be of an intellectual level that affects intellectual people very much. So therefore they have to intellectualize it, which just gets in the way of making Wagner exciting and wonderful. The fact that
I want to take one before we get into Wagner, which is my plan. Because not every listener of our program is a native English speaker, please define the way you see it, the word wallow.
Wallow is because people think that something is so magnificent, it has to be labored and stretched out and shown everyone how marvelous it is in its taken out of the context. I really, and this is a Charles Mackerras thing, I think, is that he believes when you find a pulse, that this pulse that continues through the music is what makes it exciting and brilliant, rather than let's be super musical and slow things down and that gets in the way of the flow of the pulse and of the excitement of what the natural music that's created. And sometimes composers write in it slow down or whatever, or pause here, whatever, but sometimes they don't do that. And if they don't do it, then why? And what annoys me is you do masterclasses with young singers and they slow down these arias and all these things. So why are you doing that? Well, Renee Fleming does that, and blah, 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 they just, there's a whole idea that that's okay to make music like that. I mean, during the Valkyrie now in the autumn, I was told several times, why am I taking the music so literally? Which I actually was a criticism by the person saying it, but I actually took as the greatest compliment possible.
Yeah. Wotan, I assume, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get to Wotan, the concept of wallow, James Levine, we both spoke of him admiringly for his music making and so on. I think it's fair to say that with Parsifal, Meistersinger, Act 2 of Valkyria, that he wallowed by your definition.
Well. Yeah.
And yet, I know you worked with him in Meistersinger. Were his interpretations valid to you, or would you have done something different?
No, especially, I mean, that's the genius of him, was creating the sound with the orchestra that fitted the space of the Metropolitan Opera House. He had this very broad, even into Mozart, it was a much broader sound that somehow filled the hall, needed to be filled like that. So now when you listen to recording at home and you compare it to something at Bayreuth or wherever, of course it's going to sound different, because he was making music for the hall, the space that he was in, which is something I don't think people take into account half as much as they should do, actually. And listening back now, so my first Wagner things that I ever saw, my first Valkyrie was going to the Met and seeing James Morris do it, and Deborah Voigt and Gary Lakes and Kurt Moll, all these guys, back in the early 2000s. And now listen, and I didn't know anything then. Now I've got 47 recordings of Valkyria, and I can listen to these different ways. And also I had 18 months of COVID just looking at the score and studying the score and seeing what Wagner has given us. And I, that's just why I put the Boulez one on, because Boulez obviously wants to get, the analogy for me is all these golf courses. So sorry, there's another golf story. All these golf courses that were built at the beginning of the 20th century were designed, and they were these big open places. And then over time, trees grew up. And everyone thought how wonderful these golf courses were because there's trees everywhere. And now suddenly there's a movement that the golf courses should go back to how they were originally conceived, and all the trees are being taken out. So this is for me in a nice way, and planted somewhere else. Don't worry, we're ecologically nice in the golf club. But for me, that's how I see Wagner. We need to take these trees out of things that have been put into place. And I don't think it makes it okay. Somebody did something once. If der Freie als ich, der Gott. The number, and even the director said, well, can you really wallow in that and slow it down? But it's not written. Der Freie, people take so much time with that. And it's not der Freie als ich, der Gott, He who is freer than me, and I'm the God, I should be the freest, I don't think that's not something to wallow in. And then if you do it unwallowingly, the next bit of music makes so much more sense. It comes from that. There's not enough give and take musically for people. People think that this is my bit, so I will do this magnificently. Oh, and then there's some music. No, I think of it as a flowing thing that keeps going from beginning to end. The monologue in Act 2 of Valkyrie, that's one long statement. And I just want to do it as one musical gesture, the whole thing, even though it goes around and stuff. That's just the way I think music should be made. And I don't know if that's a Charles Mackerras influence, if it's because I've done lots of singing of songs and I sing songs in that way. I'm not sure, and working with, I've worked with a lot of Baroque conductors with period instruments and stuff. I've been incredibly lucky to have a whole array of people that I've made music with, and a whole variety of music. I literally, if I was to write down everything is, when I was an 18 and whatever, when I was starting 20-year-old, all the pieces Matthew would like to do with the people he'd like to do with them, I've 10 times done that. It's amazing. I'm so grateful for all the stuff I've done, and now I've come to an understanding of how I think music should be made, which is tricky because then you get with other people who want to do it differently, and persuading or finding a middle ground is okay, and sometimes it's not okay. But it's really how I believe music should be made. It should be exciting, and you can trust these composers in what they've given you in their entirety. I think Wagner was a brilliant enough man that he could sit down and write out Valkyrie Act 3 exactly how he wanted it, and there's not that many Rallentandos people.
Yeah.
I think he just wanted it to
Rallentando meaning slowing down.
Yeah, that second scene, especially when Wotan turns up with all the daughters and is very angry. I really think just go for it. But then the scene 3, then it calms down and then ebbs and flows, and then again gets really, Brunhilde's last statement is incredibly fast, and then Wotan should come in. The Leb wohl, du kühnes, herrliches Kind. That's how it should be. I really love you, and I want not Leb wohl, du, that doesn't make any sense to me dramatically. As an actor wouldn't do that, would they? And somehow these traditions came in, and it seems to me it was in the 50s and 60s, because there's a Karajan recording from Bayreuth early 50s that of Act 3 that is famous and is incredible, and they just get through it, and it's just brilliant. So it's maybe something that happened when people started making recordings and people took them home and started thinking about them too much. Sorry,
actually,
that was a very long...
I thought of something that you inspired me just now, and this is why I told listeners that I find Matthew Rose inspiring, though we don't know each other. Yes, the 50s in recordings, and often those were live performances in Bayreuth or Vienna. But going back further, if we go back to the 30s when they were recording opera singers, often they were very slow because it was the recording technology. And I think maybe this is looked at as received wisdom or past practice of how it was to be done. It might have only been the recording studio. You hear Caruso singing Italian music in the 20s and late teens. It's often very slow. And it could be, I don't know because I'm not a recording engineer, but it could be the recording technology. But then, someone like George Schulte later on doing his famous Ring in the late 50s and early 60s for Decca in London and Vienna, had a different conducting style completely from Karajan. And so I use him as one of my North Stars about conducting Wagner. I'm not a conductor, but what I mean is my perception of how Wagner should be conducted. And I think that it gives us all a lot to choose from. And your point is very well taken, and I kind of agree with it. I should just tell listeners. Go ahead.
I think what it is that I think, again, I'm going to get myself into trouble now. I would say that probably most people that do our job are quite self-indulgent. So then if they hear other people self-indulging in music, they take it as a license to do it themselves. Mm-hmm. And as a non-wallower, I sort of do anything in my power to do the opposite. So maybe to the extreme that it's unbeneficial for me, but that's just, maybe it's just an ego thing. And if people hear something, and also sometimes it's really cool to slow something down. It sounds really cool. So people do it because they've heard that and they think that's the way it should be. I always, when I go to a score of anything, if I do Winterreise, if I sing songs, if I do an opera, an oratorio, whatever, I look at the score. What is the score telling me? Even though, I have a massive record collection, I love listening to music, but the most important thing to me is what's on the page. And what does the page tell me? And with the words, and how am I going to get it across in the way that I genuinely believe it? That's the thing. But that's what we all have to do. So people that think that things should be pointed out and taken time, fantastic for them. It's just not how I like to do it.
Well, I think you coined a word before that I will use and always attribute to you: unwallowingly.
Unwallowingly is not a good word.
Which is a very good term. Yeah. I just want to tell listeners one thing that I know many associate me with Italy and Italian opera and so on, and that makes sense. But I do completely have my Wagnerian side in that I've been to 47 complete cycles. I teach the Ring all over the world. I lead Ring symposia, and the Wagner people don't understand what I see in Verdi, but that's another thing. But so I'm very, very, very much with you on the Wagner stuff.
Also, I
And
think Wagner, I think of it as Italian music. I think of it as, if you
yeah,
think of it as bel canto music and you keep it flowing in a bel canto way, that's, he sent all his singers to Maria Malibran to have singing lessons. The same person that Bellini sent his people to, and if you think about this is good. I've thought about this a lot, Fred. Okay. So when he was writing these operas and they were first being performed, they weren't Wagnerian singers singing them, were they? They were the people singing all the Donizetti and the Verdi and the da-da-da. So it's only in time that these Wagnerian singers have emerged and people sing specifically Wagner. I really believe, and this is good that we're saying this, and for the two people that are watching, it's good that they can hear it.
a
This
lot
is my,
more. Yeah.
no, I'm just being silly. But my philosophy on singing Wagner and doing this stuff, as with every music that I do, is that it needs to flow and it needs to go and sing it with bel canto principle techniques at the core of it. This is why it's not, I don't sing Donizetti all the time. I find it actually quite scary to be on stage with someone like Artur and with Javier and with Nadine, because they spend their life singing this stuff, and I sort of once every 3 years dip my toe back into the bel canto thing, and it's.
But you were a great Oravezo in Norma.
Yeah, but that was the last bel canto I did, and that was
in a great cast. But the thing is, we don't go to Norma for the Oravezo. Let's be blunt. But I remember,
and you definitely go to Lucia for the Raimondo. That's for sure.
Well, no, but Raimondo's an important role.
Yeah, but he's definitely not
more than someone.
He's there to serve his colleagues rather than to be seen. Maybe that's just the way I see it.
But he moves the plot forward, and he, depending on the production, and I want to stick to Wagner now, is the moral center or the amoral center, and it's an important thing there, but that's for another time. But Oravezo, similarly, in an opera that has three fantastic leading roles, usually a soprano and a mezzo, sometimes two sopranos plus a tenor. You don't always note the Oravezo, though with your Oravezo I did. And, your Colline in Bohème, he only has a few minutes, but if well done, can really crystallize the story of the opera.
And even though I believe in these Italianate principles, I'm sort of a Germanic British singer at heart, doing things like Baronoct and Bottom in Midsummer Dream. That's kind of my bread and butter. That's me at my best. And I find it a total, utter privilege that the Met have asked me to do these other roles that maybe typically, and all our lovely friends on Parterre Box probably hates, but that's okay.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We'll have to mention. I don't care. I find it a total privilege that I've got to sing that music on that stage. To sing Maria Stuarda, to sing Norma, although Norma's not something I ever need to do ever again in my life. But as someone who probably should be only cast as Baronoct and Bottom and things like that, but Philip is something I really think that is me. But these more comedic things are more what I sort of tend to go to. But the fact that Jonathan Friend and the team at the Met took such a chance on me to do this whole panoply of singing roles has made me such a much better singer in person. I know that, and I could not be more grateful for the chances they took on me there.
And you do want to look at Fiesco in Simone Boccanegra.
No, well, that's one of the. So I didn't really know Boccanegra until the lockdown. So I was a good boy, and I spent a week with every Verdi opera just to sort of get to know them all better. And and Boccanegra is now something that is so dear to me. It's untrue. That opening is something that I want to have an opera festival one day just so I can start it with Simone Boccanegra with that opening.
My second favorite Verdi opera.
After Don Carlos. Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
See, we're connoisseurs, Fred,
Nothing wrong with Falstaff and Aida's
everything is, the guy was brilliant. Puccini, the guy was, all these guys were amazing, and these are the people we have to make sure live on into the future. And obviously new work needs to be composed and by a much more diverse and wonderful range of composers. The fact that we have the limited white male canon is kind of a bit embarrassing, and hopefully we're going to get away from that now.
Well, I've discussed this, had Russell Thomas on about a year ago, the wonderful Black American tenor. And he knows that I have cast on page, and I'd love to see it done in concert recording, a Black Ring with all Black singers, just to prove that, number one, it's not a gimmick and it could be done, and there are all these wonderful Black artists who can fill these roles magnificently. And so that's on the to-do list.
Would it not be the even more wonderful thing was to do a multiracial Porgy and Bess? Would that not be a more special and even more wonderful statement for the world? Maybe
I think
get to trouble
be,
again.
but there's the Gershwin estate on
no,
that.
I know.
Prevents
I know there is, but I think the
Yeah.
world, the world needs to realize that, we're all in this together, and we're all, all the wonderful people that do what we do should be doing it together, and there should be no differentiation or whatever,
So Richard Wagner.
Let's get off that, because that's a topic that doesn't need to be discussed by me.
Richard Wagner. I'm sure you and I know that I have encountered the stereotypes and the prejudice issues about him, and not just the anti-Semitism. We know that, and it's reprehensible. But if we were to leave out all the anti-Semites in the arts in the 19th century, we'd be left with Verdi, who was not an anti-Semite, and that's about it. Chopin was a terrible anti-Semite. And, I don't endorse anti-Semitism, obviously, but I also know that Wagner died in 1883 and the Nazis came to power in 1933. So that he did not do that, and he was not a Nazi. So therefore, if you agree with me, I think we should take his work on its own merits, and we can find flaws or wonderful things in it. Talking about this concept of Wagnerian, talking about this concept of the issues that he grappled with. I know that you now are working on Wotan, with one of the greatest roles in opera, although Anna Russell called him a crashing bore, but I don't agree. How do you find your way into Wotan, which is a Shakespearean character?
Well, first of all, you have to realize he's not a crashing ball.
I agree with you.
And do it exactly. He's a very impassioned guy. And, he's doing all this stuff. Okay, he fails, but he doesn't think he's doing things for wrong reasons. He's just trying his hardest to make things work in the way that he thinks they should happen. So it's important to realize that he's not just some idiot that wants everything to fail. He wants everything genuinely to be okay. It's just, and I haven't done Rheingold yet, and I probably won't ever do Siegfried, but I'd love to have a go at Rheingold. But but the emotional story of Wotan in Valkyrie is one of the great opera roles. That whole it turns out this, he's all triumphant and wonderful, and then the way that it is, and it's just like how life is. It's a home situation, a marital situation, and the wife is telling the husband, no, you don't. And this is a god, and he's completely crushed by what she asks him to do. And then there's that whole that monologue with Brunhilde is one of the great scenes in opera, isn't it? And again, I remember the first day.
For people who don't know it, let's describe the Fricka story and then the Brunhilde story.
So Frick is very upset that
his wife,
his wife is very upset that Siegmund and Sieglinde, who are brother and sister, are wanting to get it on, and she desperately wants that not to be the case and for Siegmund to be killed.
And Siegmund and Sieglinde are Wotan's children from an outside relationship.
Exactly. So the fact that she wants him to kill his own son and he knows that the only way the world can continue to be is if this person Siegmund continues the Wotan race, I guess. Yeah. So basically, she tells him, either you do this or you're done, mister. Basically, over like half an hour scene. It's an incredible scene. It's just amazing, and the way the dialogue works. And again, when you don't slow it all up, and it's just one thing running into the other. It's just, and we did that. I had Sue Bickley, who was just an amazing fricker I had. She was just incredible to work with. And then Brunhilde comes along and says, Daddy, what's happened? And then he spends
Brunhilde being one of 9 daughters from yet another relationship.
Yeah, with Ed, yeah. And then he explains over a very long period of time exactly what the situation is and why it's so terrible. And in a hope that she is now going to do what he says. He asks her very specifically to not get involved, and she gets involved, and then he spends Act 3 punishing her. Basically, that's a very basic version of Wotan, Valkyrie, isn't it? But just the range of what it goes through. And vocally, again, the range from the very low to the very high. I really think it's a bass role for basses that can go up high. I don't think it's a bass baritone role, because when you pressurize that low, it's the beginning of the monologue, especially, it's really hard to get your way through that otherwise. and again, luckily, I was supposed to have done it a couple of times in COVID times in German, actually, which were obviously cancelled. So I had spent, I had 18 months basically at home with the score, with my 87,000 recordings, with a desire to do this as well as I've done anything, and I tried really hard, and we had 11 weeks of rehearsal with Richard Jones doing this, and Richard he's a most amazing brain, and he has literally an opinion on every single word you sing, and I could have just asked him about every single word, and we almost had the time to do that, and it was just miraculous, actually. And that was the first time of me doing it. It's the first time you do anything of that scale, the first time you run a marathon or whatever, you're learning how to do it. And the rehearsal period was quite contracted at the end, so the dress rehearsals and the stage and orchestras all happened very quickly, and I was tired in a way I've never been tired before, without really knowing what was going on. So I actually learned, and then the first performance wasn't great, it was a disaster, never mind. The second performance was okay, and then the third performance I barely got through. So I
just want to clarify, you did this at English National Opera in English.
In English.
Okay, that's important to know. Yeah.
With a new translation by John Dethridge. So the fourth performance, I just knew I had to stop, because I just needed time to recover. We had 2 days between performances, which is not enough for that for the first time. So I didn't do the next performance, and they brought in Thomas Konieczny, who's the great Bayreuth Wotan. It was wonderful. So I pranced around stage while he sang amazingly. That was that was an amazing night. I love that.
But did he sing it in English or German?
He sang it in German on the side of the stage. Okay. It was the one performance my cover couldn't do. They said to me at the beginning, make sure you're not off for that one, because that's the one we don't have a cover for. And then I went to because I thought I had vocal issues. So I went to an ENT, and he looked down my vocal cords, and they were fine. And then he realized that all of these tendons and everything around here was completely tight. And this is what was preventing me from doing this. This is singing baritone octaves, actually a walk in the park, so to speak. Even though you probably sing for longer, but that's more of a brain ache. I mean, singing wise, it just flows. Whereas Wotan is very much more athletic, to 1,000 times actually, than baritone. Even though it's the same notes on the page, it's amazing how much harder it is. So I had a vocal massage and stuff, and realized that if I made sure this was all nice and loose, then it was going to be much, and I had to keep it loose through the performance. If you just sing one note slightly wrong, it all gets strained and tight. So I learned such lessons doing this, so hopefully the next time I do it, I have all this information in my armory. Unfortunately, the first night in London, you will have every single critic in the world there making a decision that Matthew Rose should never sing Wotan again, and an audience of people that decide on your first ever time doing it that this isn't what he's supposed to be doing. I know I've got a great Wotan in me, and I know that in the right circumstances and with time, it's gonna appear. So watch this space, people.
Among the many things I love about the opera Die Walküre is not the Ride of the Valkyries, which is fun, but the moral challenge that goes on between, do you do what's right or do you do what the law says? And we in the audience, if we're paying attention, come to the conclusion that although what is being proposed is entirely illegal for all kinds of reasons, in the context of the story, and if we're rooting for Wotan, or if we're rooting for Siegmund and Sieglinde, or eventually rooting for Brunhilde, that sometimes you have to break the law. And Wagner,
you don't break Fricker's law. That's the thing.
Right.
At the end of the day, the angry wife in the kitchen is the one you listen to.
Well, but the thing is, or you rewrite the law. And I say this now as an American, where we are going through terrible trauma in this country over laws that clearly are unfair and are killing people and are undemocratic. And I'm not here to bring out my opinions on this, but I think most Americans of either party and anywhere else, if they looked at it, they didn't just throw their hands up and discuss, would say, the way things are structured is not in the best interests of all people, really all people, frankly. And so that's why Wagner to me is always relevant. I hate the word, but always inspires thought, because I have been thinking in our country now, my country, where you are welcome, and you are now, of course, that there are things that Wagner could teach us and things that Verdi could teach us.
Yeah.
Verdi,
Well, they were both incredibly politically active,
Yeah.
both of them in their life, unbelievably so. What Verdi did for the Italian army and for Italian unification, and actually Wagner and German unification is actually, although Wagner was much less involved than Verdi was in Italian unification. They were, but they, in those days, opera was the most important thing that existed, and these guys were serious megastars in their, they're the most famous people in their country, probably, along with Franz Liszt, and they had all this political clout, and therefore, obviously, the politics is going to come out into their art, obviously, especially someone like Wagner who overthought all these things completely. So, yeah.
You said that you probably won't ever do The Wanderer and Siegfried. Why is that?
So I don't know.
Wanderer being Wotan with a mask on.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, but I'm sort of at a point where I'm sort of deciding how I go on. I don't need to be like we talked about Ben Luxon just stopping singing and not being a singer. I'm sort of maybe I shouldn't be saying this because casting directors won't cast me anymore. But I'm trying to work out what I do for the rest of my life, and it doesn't mean that I have to be on the road singing all these operas all the time and doing all this stuff, especially operas. You go away and do an opera, and that's 2.5 months of your life gone. In somewhere. And that's and what COVID has taught me is that I'm much better actually without A, the stress of it all, and B, being at home and enjoying a different kind of life that I've not experienced because I devoted my life completely to this art form for 15 years. My whole life was about doing as much as I can, and I loved it, and it was everything. And now I've realized it doesn't have to be everything, and I'd like to do much more teaching. I'd like to do much more organizing. I used to be had such desire to do all these roles and all these different things. And I've done, except for Gurnemans, I've basically done everything I ever dreamed of doing. I've got a Gurnemans in me. I'm singing Vodnik at the Royal Opera House this year, which is very nice. But I don't have that passion and desire to.
Gurnemans being a character in Parsifal.
Parsifal, yeah.
I think he's the longest role in that opera, actually.
And he still has like 2 hours off in the middle. Yeah, I mean, I just need to work out how I go from now, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be an opera singer all my life. I've been incredibly grateful for what I've done, and it's a very different world now. And I've enjoyed, especially over in the as an American trained singer, singing in the Met as much as I have, singing in Chicago. I've got one more thing in Santa Fe. That's the only job I have in America in the future. So. I need to really sort of work out what I do and how I do it, and it doesn't necessarily. I mean, maybe it does mean I do singing and I do lots of stuff, or maybe it doesn't. I'm kind of open at the moment to work out how things go forward. And there are things in my life I'd like to achieve outside of singing that are probably more important than all. And I've done I've done everything I ever dreamed of. I've sung at the Met 100 times, 200 times at Covent Garden, 100 times at Glyndebourne. They were the 3 opera houses I always dreamed of singing at, and they've been so good to me, all 3 of them. And standing on the stage at the Royal Opera House will always be, and looking at that beautiful auditorium will always be the biggest thrill of my life. And singing, it was always my dream to sing Rosenkavalier. And the fact that I did it on stage with Renee Fleming and Andres Nelsons and Alice Coote and blah blah blah. Well, what do you do after that?
Was that the Robert Carson production?
Yeah. So we did it first there,
which I adored. Not everyone did, but I adored it. Yeah.
Especially Act 1, I thought was just miraculous, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, isn't it? And I was just with someone, I was talking with a friend today and talking about these things and about she also is a very high achiever in what she does, and it kind of defines us and it creates a lifestyle that you sort of continue to do, even though it's probably very unhealthy for us. I mean, the stress of having to learn a very long opera role and get it absolutely perfect, and then vocally do it brilliantly, and then stand up in front of an audience 3 times a week and be brilliant. It's an awful lot of stress, and I don't know if I need that in my life anymore, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of, and like I was supposed to be in Poland doing Don Carlo. Now that was cancelled, and I was supposed to teach in July, and I basically got a very nice free summer. And there are more important things in life that I've sort of not made happen that I'd like to make happen now. So let's see how that goes. Sorry to be slightly gloomy.
No, it's not gloomy.
It's not gloomy at all.
I mean, when you were talking,
I'm very content to be able to say this and to be able to say that 15 years ago, I just had to sing everywhere and do everything and do all these roles. And now I'm really not that fussed at all. Isn't that terrible? But it's a nice place to be, and I'm very comfortable to be in that place. You know.
What I was thinking about in part as you said that was that I've known many singers who've expressed similar sentiments, that they want to be home, wherever home is. I've known certain artists, and primarily Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonning, who I was blessed to work with a lot, who had what I could only describe as a taste for the road. And when they'd be resident at the Met for 2 or 3 months, and they were wonderful. It's not that they were hankering for home. She was somewhat. He would be hankering for the next engagement. And to go, say, from New York to Vancouver, where they worked a lot, then down to Sydney, then up to London, and wherever they went, they were a team, and they loved, especially Richard Bonning, the movement, the activity, the life in the theater. And they were very close friends of Noel Coward. And Noel Coward was a similar thing. I'd never met him, but they described him to me, that working and being in venues and being in front of audiences and collaborating with colleagues was what gave him life, so to speak. And she also could do needlepoint and be a little more tranquil, but I know that she on the stage thrived, and he in the pit loved the leadership, the collaboration, and you were talking about his conducting before. I could feel it. I remember, sort of we're coming to a last Lucia or last Puritani, and they'd say to me, well, it's il faut partir, hélas, it's time to go. And we need to do our next thing. And they would be studying for whatever the next engagement was. And it was not necessarily the umpteenth Lucia. It might be Anna Bolena, might be something new. And that always made a big impression on me, because I confess to having a taste for the road and love this movement of working in all kinds of places. And for me, COVID has been a challenge. As I said, I didn't have it because I haven't gone anywhere in 2.5 years. And I have loved doing this program for Adagio because it brings me in contact with colleagues, with people who think about and care about things that I care about from the isolation of my apartment. And one day I will be back out on the road again, and I wonder if it will be different. Maybe, I think COVID is lessons for everyone. And then number one lesson are public health issues and universal vaccination and all of that about public health policy. But number two, economic policy. But number three, when presented with something so universal, you want to ask yourself the existential questions. And what would I do? I mean, I wrote a book in this period. I'm taking care of a loved one. I'm happy to do that. But I missed the road. Maybe that's something different for you. And I would, I understand you completely, because I think the majority maybe don't love the road as much as the Bonnings did and as much as I do.
I mean, I've just been in New York for 4 months, and I studied in Philadelphia. There's an awful lot of my, I just was in Philadelphia last week playing golf with some very dear friends and spending time with lots of other lovely friends. I've accumulated this amazing group of people around me in lots of different places, especially in Philadelphia, New York area, in London, in Vienna, Berlin. I have this amazing range of friends, and even if I'm not doing this job, I can still see them. I know that. But I mean, to be honest, I had burnout about 4 or 5 years ago, and not having the same resources with adrenaline to get through this is actually really hard. I used to just swallow up music. I just used to wake up in the morning and sit there with a score for hours and hours, and I could just do that. And now it's 10 times harder for me to put that information in my head. It's 10 times harder for me to go to rehearsal and enjoy the process. Although being in Don Carlos now has been, I wasn't it very much, but it was like me in the old days. It was very much me reliving how I always used to love doing this job, and not everything is like that. I find it things, maybe I shouldn't be saying these things, or maybe I should, whatever. But there are certain aspects of what we do that I find 100 times harder than I used to. And already it was a hard job to do, and now when you find it so much harder to get up and do it, and to get that, it's getting the information into the brain, and then in a rehearsal situation, getting it out of your brain, it's just not what it. I used to be so quick, and I could, pick up stuff and it all come out and it'll be brilliant. And now, for whatever reason, I don't know why, it's not such an easy process to do that. So therefore, everything becomes a lot harder and a lot more unsatisfying, so to speak. So. And I love teaching. I love being in a room teaching someone, and that doesn't take all that preparation. You don't have all the stress of being a performer. And I love putting programs together. And I love thinking about how I would do festivals and whatever. I'd love to run a festival and to do, a 2-week program of me expressing things that I think need to be expressed for people to get music and to be thrilled in a certain way. That's what really thrills me. And if I can still do the odd singing job and enjoy that and do it in a nice, comfortable, the only time I ever took time off before COVID was I took 2 months off to learn Rosenkavalier. I think the first month I went to Scotland and played golf, which was naughty. So basically I learned Rosenkavalier in 4 weeks, whatever. And that was literally the only time in my career I wasn't dovetailing, doing an opera while learning one at the same time. And also, I used to do song recitals all the time. I remember there was one period in 2011, in September and October, I did 27 different projects, including 2 different song recitals, and I could do it and it was fun and I loved it. There's no way I'd even do 2 things in that time now, so I understand now what I'm capable of doing and how I need to do it to be happy and to make other people happy around me, and, maybe I will, I don't want to stop singing because I love it and I love the way I feel for singing and I love being in front of an audience when I'm doing something really well. And because it makes, I think it's so important that people see us doing our jobs really well. And that's something that gives me a lot of excitement and a lot of encouragement for the future. But, even if I was to go off and start a bed and breakfast somewhere and do photography or something, I'd still, I'm still me. I'm still going to have these wonderful friends that I've made in the music business. And it's hard because you have these attachments to people and to the thrill of being on stage and to, I love working at the Met. The people at the Met, even though the stage crew has changed so much, the backstage crew, the makeup people, the stage management. I'm friends. I always somehow make friends with musicians. Much probably easier than singers, maybe. So in all these orchestras, I know all these people that play, and it's just an amazing group of people, especially the Met, that work so hard for what we do. And just knowing these people and knowing that situation, I love. And if I wasn't to go back there again, I'd miss incredibly. But at the same time, I'm quite content with having a different life that doesn't maybe have all that stuff. It's just very easy to say, and maybe I don't actually mean it, but I think I can at least say these things now.
I think what's particular about the bass voice is that potentially you have longevity in ways that sopranos don't, for example.
Yeah. Which is a blessing and a curse, isn't it?
Yeah, because Ferruccio Furlanetto is singing magnificently, whatever age he is, but and Samuel Ramey is taking on a new role in Houston next year, and
Okay.
the sacristan in Tosca, and therefore it is possible for those who want it. And there are many juicy bass roles that are not only Wotan, which is epic, but smaller roles that are wonderful. Donald McIntyre did it for a very long time. There are some who do. Franz Mazura was another one who was singing in the 90s.
Or even Hans Hotter, really.
Hans Hotter as well. So therefore, it is possible. It leads me to what I guess is my final question, although you and I are certainly both. I have 2 questions. One of them is golf.
Okay.
What's with golf?
It's something I've done since I was 13 or something, and it's and again, I was talking again with this friend this morning, and it's more. I think it's more about the art of golf, about executing this perfect thing, rather than beating someone's brains out and whatever. That's not what it's about. It's about being an incredibly beautiful environment for several hours, normally with people that's company you enjoy very much, and trying to do something in a perfect way. So it's for me, it's much more artistic than it is a big bashful sporting thing. And again, doing the job we do, we had 9 performances of Lucia over the course of a month. So that's an awful lot of 3 days. And there's an awful lot of great golf courses around New York City. And I was very lucky and then in Philadelphia last week, including I played at a place called Pine Valley, which is just into New Jersey from Philadelphia. And that will be the greatest day of my life, I swear. I mean, just to play that golf course was just it's a thrill, and it's I've invested a lot of my time in understanding what golf's about and golf course architecture. I have a lot of books on golf course architecture. It's something I'm devoted to in the way that people that go to the Met love opera. So and it's great, and you can meet some amazing people through golf, and
well,
it's just a very nice way to spend time. Ferruccio, I know I tried to get a game with him, but he gave me a list of reasons why he couldn't play a couple of weeks ago. So
he years ago was doing 2 roles, and I'm guessing that they were Leporello and probably Figaro in Salzburg on alternating days. And he insisted on having golf time as the way to separate from all that and relax in nature and to focus only on the hitting of the ball and on nothing else. I've known many singing golfers, Thomas Hampson, Barbara Bonney, Bryn Tervel, many. And Matthew Polenzani, I spoke to him about this once, the tenor, and his take is different. He loves everything that you've described, but also he found that it's a way to meet people who knew nothing about opera and cultivate interest in these people in opera. They're often people with money who might become supporters of opera companies, who would fund scholarships and so on. And I appreciated that Matthew understood that he could use golf to promote opera.
But Matthew's also just, I went, so just the day before our last Don Carlos performance, we went and played at his club. And we played golf with this guy who was just Matthew's friend. Their kids went to school together. He was just a normal guy, knows nothing about opera. Matthew's just a very normal guy that just happens to be incredibly gifted, and he just wants to be with nice people that he finds interesting. It's not like maybe there's the whole way of cultivating people, bringing people into opera, which has been a massive part of my life, by the way. And I've done a lot of projects in London and stuff. Opening the door is the most important thing, and giving people information that is going to make their experience the best possible. I know from personal experience that is absolutely the best thing to do. So I get that's what he does. But having been with him at his golf club with this very, very normal guy, it was brilliant to see. Matthew's just a very normal guy that is just extraordinary and does his job brilliantly. He's such a brilliant artisan, is what he is.
He is. Yeah. I mean, the range
and the loveliest man, and he's such a nice man. He's such a great man.
He is.
Yeah.
So the final question is a question that I could have begun with, but I decided to save it for the end because I don't write questions, but I knew I wanted to ask you this. I have always been a fan of the bass voice. Were I a singer, I'm not a bass, I'd be a baritone. But and most of the basses that I've ever met and worked with are the most wonderful people. They're not shy at all. They are people with strong opinions and strong principles and very distinct and diverse in their outlooks on the world. But all of them have been wonderful people to be with. Do you have any explanation for that? I mean, I will now add you to that list, but I mean, I can name that really some of my best experiences, my professional career has always been with basses.
Well, I think probably of all the voices, apart from the contralto, there are probably fewer basses than anything, and yet there's an incredible need for them in most operas. So most of us have nice work patterns, so I'm sure that helps. Also, there's a lot less pressure. Standing on stage, walking around while Nadine is singing that mad scene, all I have to do is walk around and she's doing 15 minutes of the most ridiculous, amazing singing. There's an awful lot less pressure. Okay, we do sometimes have the Rosencavaliers and the Midsummer Night's Dreams where we're the main part, and that maybe overinflates our ego when we come to other things, maybe.
And the devil rolls and the Attilas and the Mozarts.
Yeah, being sort of a rounded-faced man, that stuff hasn't come my way so much, No, I did one opera with my shirt off. I think everyone learned their lesson from that. I think it's just the fact that we're doing a job that there's not so much competition in. I think it makes there's not so much cutthroatery, and I've got a lot of Christian's a very good friend, Brinley Sherritt. I've got a lot of bass friends, John Tomlinson, someone I go walking on the Sussex Downs with a lot, as Eric Halverson says, it's like this fraternity of basshood or whatever. It is like we're all, we all understand that there's a long time to do this job, and we all know the process and how it goes, and we're all understanding of how each one does their work. And there's not so much pressure, again, because of the longevity of the career, potentially because of what the roles demand. I think it's a slightly less pressure than literally every other voice type. We don't have to sing Carmen, we don't have to sing Traviata, we don't have to sing.
Although I've seen basses attempt Escamillo and Carmen, and I say attempt because I don't see that role being congenial to anyone's voice, but that's just my opinion.
Luckily, I don't think anyone wants to see me dressed as a matador, so I think that one's going to be safe for me. But there's, like you said, Matthew Polizzoni's not an atypical tenor, is it? We can't stereotype so easily. There are so many incredible people in our business doing every single kind of job, makeup artists, orchestral people, and just the privilege that I've had to spend all this amazing time with these people. Some of my best friends are in the makeup department at the Met, in the stage management at the Met, and the stage management at the Royal Opera House, and the stage management at Glyndebourne. It's just an amazing thing, and mostly it's people that really love this art form and really believe in it and really want for it to succeed. And that's why I've been driven to do what I do, because it's much more important, the longevity of what this amazing stuff that has been created. I'm just a very small cog in a wheel that hopefully will continue to make this stuff happen way into the future. And it needs to. The Marriage of Figaro needs to always exist. Like the Mona Lisa always needs to exist, the Marriage of Figaro needs to exist, so opera houses need to exist. And so let's hope, even though I've maybe been slightly pessimistic, but that's more about myself than anything, I think.
But you and I are going to make an appointment for your fiasco in Simone Boccanegra.
I would a fiasco.
All right.
Yeah,
that has to be in the plan, even if
you fiasco, please, Fred, that would be nice. And then I can just shut up shop and
no, but I mean, really, I think I just knowing you as an audience member and now knowing you today somewhat, I just think that would be a great role for you.
Well, I need to do Philip as well properly. I was supposed to be doing Philip now in Poland. I need to do it, and I've never even sat down and talked to someone about what that aria really means. And superficially it means something, but I know it's so much deeper than even what I dreamed it could be. I just love to be with a great director and a great conductor in a room for 5 weeks working on that. If it's just that role, I mean, Philip, just to do that properly, it's great that I sang it at the Met, and that was it was kind of a crazy situation, and I did about as well as I possibly could have done, considering. But it is something I would love to rehearse and do properly. And if I could do Philip and Guinemanz, they're the two I'd love to do a bit more. And if I could do some more Leporellos, please, and one more Midsummer Night's Dream, then I'll be fine. Then I could wander off into the sunset.
Or to the 18th hole or the 19th hole, I guess.
The first hole. We have to start somewhere.
The first hole. Okay. Matthew Rose, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Fred. It's been
I've enjoyed. I've learned the underpinnings of your performances that I've so admired, and your work practice, your ideas, and thank you for sharing them with the public around the world.
No, thank you, Freddie. Thank you. And thank you for doing what you do.
You be well.